Welcome, everybody, to the moment you've been waiting for. This is the grand finals of the I'm Not GM Speeches Championship. Grandmaster Robert Hess alongside me today, as always, is Grandmaster Amon Hamilton. Amon, we have quite a matchup in store for the people. What do you make of it?
Well, hello, Robert. Hello, everybody. And I hope everyone is ready for some primetime action. This is the finals. You only get to say that once in every competition. This is Roberto Molina against Gotham Chess, aka Levy Rozman. This is going to be a lot of fun, Robert. I think that what we've seen so far from Levy has been just match after match, tons and tons of time scramble issues, but tons and tons of exciting chess recoveries. He's been down in pretty much every match and made a comeback to win. So when it comes to the finals, he's going to be up against Roberto Molina, a very, very tough opponent who, the way I see it, he has more than earned his right to be in the finals, Robert.
He definitely has, and he's thrived in all time controls. And let's remind everybody of what those time controls are, because we have three different ones. We start with the 75 minutes of 5+1 blitz. That's 5 minutes with 1 second increment. We then go into the 45 minutes of the 3+1. Finally, we get 25 minutes of bullet, and that's where Levy has mounted his comebacks. But against a player as strong as Roberto Molina, who has been solid in all time frames, that's going to be an immense challenge. And also, the prize fund has increased because we just have two people left. There is $1,800 on the line in this matchup. The winner gets $900. The rest is split by win percentage. Always something to play for, no matter the game number. And let's go over the bracket just to remind our viewers how we got here, because there are only two players left standing. International Master Levy Rozman, Gotham Chess, taking on International Master Roberto Molina. And Amon, they both earned their spot in this final. Roberto, he went through the semis just so clearly. Clean matchup, it felt like, at the end against Lars Oscar Haug, because he swept the bullet portion against the very strong Norwegian player.
Yeah, and I think that's a point you bring up that we should focus on for the match upcoming against Levy, because there's going to be some fireworks whenever one of the players has made most, if not all, of his comebacks in the bullet portion, and meanwhile you're dealing with a guy on the other side of the table who just swept one of the best bullet players in the competition. So this is doubtlessly a heavyweight matchup no matter what, but especially make sure to focus on that bullet section when we get there, guys, because we have two 2,800 class bullet players going head to head. And Robert, what I'm saying is, hey, if you're Levy Rozman, I think you got to keep this a lot closer in the blitz portion, because Roberto is not going to be giving up as much ground for those comebacks in bullet.
That's absolutely correct. That deficit that Levy faced against Greg Shahadi, especially losing the last few 3-minute games, that won't do against Roberto Molina, because Roberto is so quick and he's so solid. He just doesn't make the blunders we've seen some other people make throughout this event. Of course, he is beatable. He's lost many games in this contest. These are long matches, but Roberto has proven his might time after time. And so Levy will have his handful with the Brazilian star. So, Amon, we're just about ready to see the action take place. I'm excited for it. We're going to get a whole lot of Caro-Kann today.
Yeah, you hinted at that in the last match. We can see the players on cams there. This is going to be Caro-Kann centric. Basically, who cracks first? I wonder, because it's an interesting thing when both players play an opening. All of a sudden, they're probably doing a lot of their work from the other side in order to try to get a good position against it, in order to try to beat it. So, for once, Robert, both these guys are going to have to open up those theoretical books and try to find a good line to play against an opening they both like.
I find it super awkward to play against my favorite openings, because I'm like, wait, that looks good. Can I switch colors right here? But we see D4 by Roberto, so no Caro-Kann for Levy, at least not in this first game. And we see a Queen's Gambit. We're off to a QGA. I'm a bit surprised by that decision, but perhaps I shouldn't be.
Yeah, the QGA, just characterized as Robert mentioned there, accepting the gambit. D takes C4, so a temporary extra pawn for black. And I say temporary, Robert, because that's already been evened up.
It has, and Levy moving very quickly out of the gates here. That's a good sign for his fans and for him, because he has shown some questionable time management in the 5-minute portion, but right now he actually has a slight lead. It's still early stages. I tend to like White's position for now, but you can see Black quickly getting a C5 move, castle kingside, and try to take over some squares on the queen side, and that's how Black's position can get better. But look at this knight D2. That knight can go to B3, and C5 becomes increasingly difficult to play.
Yeah, and because of the styles here, I think that Roberto's style being so solid is one that you really have to be careful as Levy not to get down on time against. It's one of the worst things, Robert, to be, first of all, down on time in general, but down on time when your opponent is just playing quick, solid moves it's a really, really tough thing to face. And we could see him getting flagged in a lot of like relatively equal positions where the only difference is the clock. So one thing to be careful of going forward as the move a6 has been played, Robert, he didn't want that pawn to show up on a6 for white.
No, he certainly did not. But we saw that a6 pawn dropped by Lars in the previous matchup against Roberto. So look at the queen and bishop lined up against the a6 pawn, well defended for the time being. But if the knight moves and that rook follows suit, that a6 pawn could drop. That's a permanent target. And look at white expanding in the center. I already really like Roberto's position. However, Levy has shown some very good understanding of positions that may seem a bit worse with less space and things of that nature, but he's been able to hold his own in Caracons and here in this Queen's Gambit accept it.
Yeah, and speaking of less space, e5 makes sure to drive that point home. e5, knight d5, so a nice square in the center for Levy, but whenever you see this imbalance, e5, knight d5, you always got to pay attention to the king side. All of a sudden, a bishop on d3, queen on e4 can launch a really quick attack against the king side because there's no knight that can ever appear on f6 to play defense again. You might see something like rook d1, intermediate, take that pawn back whenever he wants.
That's a great move, rook to d1. I like that better. But he takes with the f3 knight, and you may be wondering, why is he moving his knight away from the king side? But that opens up the queen, potentially to go to g4 or to h5, depending on what happens in the next few moves. And so white can go forward with an attack. And remember that a6 pawn, Aman. If knight c6, perhaps I can just trade on c6 and steal that a6 pawn. So black has to be careful not to drop that pawn on the a file.
Well, this is Roberto Molina we're talking about, and you just said the word trade. So knight c6, not something that I think Levy's going to be going for early on. Wow, and there he goes, and there's the trade. I mean, Robert, we're just calling these moves play by play. This is too easy at the moment. Why is that pawn not takeable?
I think you can just capture that. And I think you probably should, because that knight on b3 defends the a5 pawn. Sometimes you give up a pawn and then win the pawn that's behind the one you sacrifice. But that a5 pawn, safe and sound there. I would be just grabbing that pawn pretty quickly, enjoying it, and then asking Levy to prove that he has enough compensation for it.
I'm just glad that you're going to enjoy the pawn as well, because I just hate these pawn grabbers these days, Robert, that take pawns and don't enjoy them. That's part of the gluttony, Bishop takes a6. He's really thinking here. What we have seen as counterplay towards taking some of these free pawns, especially in the match against Lars, was immediate counterplay on the king side. So something like bishop g5 and maybe trying to trade and get the queen out to g5. There's been a lot of counterplay on the g2 square. So I think Roberto is making some considerations right now, and he doesn't end up going for that. Is that PTSD from his last match and some of the counterplay he experienced?
I think he just is a very practical player. He says, I could take on a6 that may give Levy some tactical opportunities that you were just discussing. So let me play positionally. That pawn a6 is not going anywhere. And if black's best move is bishop c6 back to b7, that rook on 8 still can't leave the square. And so I can bring my rooks in the center, and black has a harder time doing so.
Right. That's a good point. Just the patience in saying that pawn on a6 is always going to be there. And if I'm not going to win it, well, I'm going to tie down two of your pieces to the defense of that pawn for the rest of the game. So he does go back and defend it, though. I'm just wondering, is Roberto going to regret that decision, not grabbing the pawn when he could?
I'm just trying to figure out what black's exact plan is. Probably queen d7, because the a8 rook can't move, but that rook on f8 would love to join the party. So maybe that rook on f8 lands on d8 or c8, depending on how white plays. So queen d7 is a good start. And I'm not really seeing how Roberto can take advantage of the fact that his rook is the first one in the game. So he's kind of one move ahead, if we think about it in terms of development, and yet there's no immediate way that I see to take advantage. But he's going for it, queen g4.
Yeah, he's trying to say, look, bishop h6 works really well with queen g4. There's no bishop f6, no knight f6. That pawn on e5 doing work. Bishop h6 right now is a huge threat, because if you play g6, well, don't forget that rook on f8 is behind, and that's why we see the move king h8 played. It's not a move that Levy wants to play. Bishop h6 is such a big threat, and the king side just belongs to white here. That pawn on e5 compared to the counterpart on e6 just gains so much space, controls so many squares here.
If the rook could move like a knight for a quick second and hop onto the third rank and get a rook lift, then black could be in big trouble. If that rook could just take the elevator up to d3, scoot on over to the king side, that would be excellent. But that takes so much time at the moment. You have to go bishop e1. Wait, trying to find like some tactics to make it work, but it feels slow. So he goes direct. He's saying, hey, I don't need my rook out there. I'm just going to push my pawn up the board, and maybe I'll play bishop to g5, which trades off one of black's defenders over there, and then play rook to d3, trying to get the c5 square for my knight. A lot of different possibilities at this point.
And speaking of different possibilities, Levy is probably noticing that, wait a minute, that queen on g4, while you're making some threats and while my king has had to sidestep to h8, keep in mind, it's no longer on e2. So that a6 pawn that we've been talking about for the entire opening phase of the game, no longer attacked. And that's why Levy takes the opportunity to say, look, rook a to c8. Now I can get that rook out, the guy who was previously tied to the defense of the a pawn. And whether there's going to be, queen g3 played, whether there's going to be some sacrifices on c4 or not, I'm not sure what to, I mean, queen a4 even comes to mind as an idea here.
And Levy just playing the solid chess, queen e8. But sometimes solid is not the way to go. And it seemed based on the eval bar, something was missed. I'm now looking at the position, maybe some kind of knight c3 move, just cutting off the rook on c1 from the bishop on c4. But I was helped out by the eval bar. I'm not certain about that. But queen e8 feels like a very normal move. It's helping to get your queen off of the line of the rook on d1. Your queen's closer to the king side to help in the defense if white brings more forces. I don't mind that move one bit.
Not at all. Queen e8 makes a lot of sense. We've been mentioning moves to follow up for Roberto. h5 and bishop g5 both look consistent. h5 has the idea of playing h6. If you play g6, then you can follow up with something like bishop to g5. And you start to take control of some of those dark squares around the king, where it was very, very dangerous for Levy. So I think h5 by white would be met with something like h6 by black.
Although, is knight c3 now an even bigger threat because the queen moved off the d file and the rook would like to take that bishop on c4. So knight c3 is in the air.
Yeah, and you always wonder with tactics like that, especially when they may have been available last turn. It's like, is your opponent going to notice them if you keep leaving that idea there? Maybe Roberto is saying, well, my opponent didn't see it last turn. I guess he's not going to notice it this turn. But it's always annoying when you notice a tactic and you're not sure whether your opponent does. But of course, you always have to react and play the best move.
Yeah, you don't want to have wishful thinking. And he does play h5. You recommend it. But look at the clock situation. We don't say this very often, but Levy has about double the time that his opponent does. So all of a sudden, it's Levy with the lead on the clock and with a position that looks very stable. But h6 for black or h6 for white, that's the big question right now. And Levy should spend some time trying to figure that out.
Yeah, you mentioned knight c3, but even going for that move when h6 is available, h6 is always going to be punched in at the end of a lot of variations. So I like the move h6 for black. However, I understand sometimes even after h6, you can play things like, I know it looks crazy, Robert, but g takes h6, followed by something like queen g8. And all of a sudden, white might actually regret opening the king up, funny as that may sound.
Yeah, that bishop on b7 is so strong over there. And one thing, if black plays h6, I'm looking for like a bishop d3, bishop b1, queen d3. Let's get a battery and go checkmate you on h7. And it seems very far away, but that is one of white's plans in a position like this. But here we go. Roberto pushes through to h6. We're getting a bullet scramble at this point. Now Levy is down 10, make it 15 seconds in a second here. And I'm starting to like Roberto's position based on the ease of play.
Yeah, and I know the eval bar is going up, but somehow I don't mind this queen g8 idea. I feel like the better way to execute it was to take and then get the queen over. So it'd sort of be almost with tempo on the queen. But I do like the g file opening up for black, and we start to see the eval bar agree with that.
Yeah, I would put my bishop back on f1. And something that we talked about from the early stages, we kind of forgot about it. We tabled it. That a6 pawn, still a weakness. So the bishop on b7, stuck in place, defending that. The bishop goes back to e2. It could have also went back to f1, but I like this move. Now that a6 pawn, even without the rooks on the board, will still be a problem for black.
Will. And the a5 pawn, conversely, it's really hard to attack. The knight on b3 is defending it very solidly, and bishop d8 is such a strange way to go about attacking that thing. Bishop d3 covers c2, so even though Levy has the open file here, Robert, you can't use any of those squares.
I really like that move, Bishop G5, though, because now you help your pawn structure, bring it close to the center, no longer isolate H pawn, and you can get some of the squares in the C file, but not yet. C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, all under White's control, funnily enough, but knight E7 opening that bishop up, and, well, this is just a time scramble.
And I don't like that move. I feel like you could even just go for the trade. Rook c2 is a big threat here. And that e-pawn, I think it's going to start to feel overextended. So I think this is Levy's game.
Yeah, he's played really well to get here. And right now he plays rook c4. He wants to go king f5. He can bring that king in. There could be a g4 check, but that gives black the f4 square. So he brings his knight back to c7. That may have been, that's a step in the wrong direction.
I was going to say, I thought he was maybe just going to put it right back on d5, which is okay. Like, and sometimes in these positions, don't be afraid to shuffle pieces. It's all about the time. It's plus 1 second increment. And knight f4 is a fantastic outpost.
It is an, okay, he barely got that move on it. 0.1 seconds left, and now he loses on time. Do you think Roberto just forgot about the clock? He was moving way too deliberately with no time remaining.
And it's funny because when you said that he barely got that move off, I saw him almost like bring his hand up as if he thought he was going to flag. And then his hand was like off the mouse, so he really did flag or something. I wasn't sure what happened there, but not a good start for Roberto Molina because that time pressure is going to be present for the entire match, Robert. That plus 1 second, players have to get used to the fact that that's barely enough time to process your opponent's move, let alone make your own.
That's very true. And credit to Levy for playing great defense at first and then just having purpose to all of his moves. He was able to seize an advantage in the endgame, and Roberto couldn't keep up on the clock, and the position was starting to favor black as well. So right now we have a Caro-Kann. This is the Greg Shahade line, the 2 knights variation that Levy had a few words about. He was like, why are you playing this? Maybe he said, not so bad after all. I like what I faced. And here we see that with the white pieces, Levy has the bishop pair. He has the D pawn, black has an E pawn, so not a symmetrical pawn structure, and white has a bit more space, but black is so solid. The B7, C6, and F7, E6 pawn chains there. They blunt the bishop on E2. Can't find that great of a diagonal, at least not for the near future.
Yeah, a little nod there to Greg Shahade. He's like, man, why are you playing this boring line? Well, actually, I don't mind that position. Let me have a go at that. A4 played by Levy early on. You might be wondering what that move is all about. Just trying to gain a little bit of space there. A4 up to A5, sort of reminiscent of the space that was gained by white in the previous position with that A pawn. So queen over to B3. Not sure the queen is necessarily the best on B3, but you can see the setup he's going for. He wants to control the D5 square, and he wants to, at all costs, keep the bishop pair on the board. So, you know, if bishop g5 happens, knight d5, you won't see him, I think, trading those bishops. He's trying to keep them on the board.
That's right. And, well, if you can't beat him, you join him. And Levy did have some struggles against Greg's openings in the Caro-Kann. Very interesting match. Neither side really pulled ahead, and it was the bullet, as we mentioned, that gave Levy the win, but that wasn't any longer in the Caro-Kann in the same way. So let's see. Here we have the knight on d5. It's established. Black can't push those pawns, though. If you push c5, then your b7 pawn feels very loose. If you push e5, well, white's already ready for that because the rook on e1, the pawn on d4, it seems like you're leaving some things quite vulnerable. So right now, Levy needs to find a move. And, well, what is that move? Because your position looks kind of perfect. I don't know how to proceed.
Yeah, I always like playing g3. I'm a big fan of starting to get the pawns on dark squares, g3 and h4, and then even maybe considering h5 in the future. But g3 is also a great move to just control the f4 square. It's a square that black can use for a number of his pieces, and we do see the move g3. Getting the king up to g2, h4, sliding the rook to h1, going for h5. It's almost, as you said, Robert, the position is so perfect for the rest of the pieces. Well, all the moves that I'm suggesting have nothing to do with them. These are just slow moves to improve the kingside position and maybe hint at a potential h-file attack.
I like it. Incremental progress may be the way to go. And if all of your major pieces are on their best squares, you need to make a pawn breakthrough. And there are 7 pawns per side, not open files to work with, right? Semi-open D file for black, semi-open E file for white, but you're staring into a protected pawn there. And look at Roberto. He says, I'm done sitting and waiting. I'm pushing my pawn to B5, which stops you from playing C4, and can also open the B file at a moment's notice, and that pawn on B2 can start feeling like it's in danger. So I like the decision by Roberto because he couldn't just sit and wait forever.
And there's going to be a move, bishop c1, which I think is kind of instrumental. Okay, he goes c4, totally different direction. Usually black is pretty happy to see this, but I was going to hint at bishop c1, guarding the b pawn in case the b file got open. We saw that utilized by Greg very effectively in the match against Levy, but instead, totally different approach, and one that I'm not a really big fan of, Robert, because that pawn on d4, it's going to require support for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at Levy for any reaction. So far, it just looks like Roberto trying to regain his composure, and Levy not really showing much on his face, at least. But I did not like that decision either. That pawn on d4 isolated, under attack multiple times, and now look at your bishop on c3. That bishop is a big pawn defending d4, defending b2, and black can even consider c5 here, trying to rip open the position, put pressure on d4. The rook would love to recapture on c5, hit your queen, hit your bishop behind it. I think that Roberto now has all of the initiative, and white needs to be very careful not to be in huge trouble the next few moves.
And c5 is a strong move. We'll see if he takes the time here. I mean, it's 3.5 minutes on the clock for Roberto. He's got lots of time. c5 is a move he can calculate out, but it's not the solid approach. You know, that pawn often does stay on c6. Its counterpart on e6, supporting d5. It's just a totally different style to play the move c5 than I would guess. Robert wants to handle the position a little bit differently here.
Well, Roberto did talk about this in the post-match interview. He says, I don't want the tactics. I want the positional chess. I want to trade queens. And so c5 is welcoming tactics that are a bit unclear. So he plays h5, just stops some action on the king side. Maybe he'll play a move like bishop g7 just to make sure his bishop is safe and protected by the king. I could see him taking that sort of approach, but I do believe that c5 is a good move here, and it may be time to pounce.
Agreed. c5 is screaming right now. We might see those other moves, queen b6, king g7, but I think any other move, it just gives Levy time to sort of recuperate here and get his pieces on better squares now that the structure on the queen side and in the center has changed a little bit. Earlier, it was actually Levy who I think had all the time to play with. His pieces were all in great squares, and we do see that queen b6, just these slow moves are not what this particular position needs.
You know what I'm thinking? That he did not want to see a queen sacrifice of c5. We can show that in the analysis board really quickly. That if instead of queen b6, he played c5, perhaps there was pawn takes c5, rook takes c5, and then queen takes c5. Because after the queen is captured, the bishop on f6 hangs, and that's actually a scary looking position. I know that black, based on the eval bar on screen here, is better, but I wouldn't be feeling comfortable with my king on g8 and so many dark squares vulnerable.
That's a great point. I'd be really interested to know if Roberto calculated something the likes of that, but that would be exactly the type of line that would scare Roberto off, because it's unclear. You don't know what the real evaluation of that position is. Instead, he's got a solid game. Knight on d5. There's no way that we could look at his position and have any concerns about Roberto's position.
He's much more likely to take on c3 and then play c5, or well, he played knight b4 here, just keeping that d4 pawn in place. He is just trying to play sound chess, and that often is a good thing, and it works very well for him. He's an extremely strong player, but I do think that it prevents him from getting more out of certain positions, and this one is no exception to that. So while white has struggling to defend this d4 pawn, I'm not even sure how you can defend it. Queen f4 played, and that looks good. I'm getting out of the pin on the d file, so no more e5 ideas or c5, and I think it's a reasonable situation for Levy at this point.
I think so as well. He might return actually with the knight to d5, hitting the queen, and just trying to come up with another decision there. I mean, there is a repetition on the board: knight d5, queen d2. Always got to be on the lookout for those. But I think if you're Roberto here, you play this on. If you get a Caro-Kann position with an isolated pawn on d4, I mean, just pay attention. This Levy is doing nothing but playing defense right now. This is a dream Caro-Kann for black, and he's up on time. So I think if you have a way to play on, you take it.
So he does play knight to d5, hoping for bishop takes d5. Please take me there. My rook can take back on d5, and I'm just large and in charge there in the center. So I think that after knight d5, queen d2 will be played, and maybe Roberto will take on c3. He doesn't have to. He could play knight b4 and go for the repetition. And Aman, I'm thinking about this from a match perspective. Yes, he is down 1 point. He lost the first game, but that was on time in a nearly level position. I don't think he should be upset if he makes a draw and remains down on the scoreboard. So he could repeat, but look at Levy playing queen e4. I'm not sure if that's playing for more or there's something he didn't like about queen d2.
Yeah, there is something to be said about just not repeating because maybe your opponent wants you to repeat so they can change their move to a better one. Instead, you take it upon yourself, repeat, and well, talk about repetition. I mean, G4, Robert, he's saying, look, I don't want any type of draw. With the move G4, highly committal. I expected the move Rook H8, probably going to be followed up with something like Rook H1, but this changes the scope of everything as now Levy's pawn structure, Robert, is terrible. He has to win tactically.
He must. And we heard Roberto talk about this. He's like, I don't want to get into tactics, but if they happen, I can do it. And that's what happened in that game against Lars last match, where his king was on E7 or something like that in the opening, and he won that game when the action really started heating up. So right now, the F4 square was what Black was looking for. Bishop D2 says, no, not for you. And I would probably try to move my king away to F8 and start running because I don't want H5 to happen and my king to be sitting right in the crossfire.
Yeah, it's actually pretty safe for the king on E7, surprisingly, and opening up that G file. Not exactly what Levy wants to do after King F8 because the rook might slide to G8 with a pin, and Bishop D2 play because you want to get out of the potential exchange. You also want to take control over the F4 square. Very important to stop knight F4. That's the main reason he couldn't punch in H5 right away.
And a big problem for white is the clock, but also the d4 pawn. That remains a weakness. So if the knight moves away from d5 at some point, that d4 pawn could fall. But look at him, bishop e7. He wants knight f6. And Levy says, have fun with knight f6 because I'm still going for you. And yet now he's thinking, 10 seconds, counting down, you got to move. And now there's no more attack.
Now, yeah, the attack just ends here, which is always tough. And the queens getting traded should be a good thing for black, especially with that pawn on h6. In an endgame, that pawn's just going to get picked off.
Yeah, that's a great king on h7, blockading the pawn. No attack. There's no knight to jump to g5, for example, so you cannot boot the king from its blockading square. And now d4 is a potential target, and rook a8 just to defend a5 and I guess defend c6 and play rook b6. Look at that maneuver, getting a rook to the b file.
Yeah, he needs to get there at some point. And Levy, if he can play rook c1 and say, look, take my h pawn, I'll take your c pawn, he'd love to make that trade because that h pawn is pretty much a goner anyways.
And so he gets knight b4, and now he should play c5. At long last, he does it because the rook on a6 is the heroic piece defending the e6 pawn.
It's true, but rook c1, we're seeing some activation with 4 seconds here by Levy. Pawn is going to get to e5, it looks like, and support that bishop. Lock that bishop on g3 out of the game permanently. The rook on a6 is still defending things, Robert.
It is a great piece, and bishop g4 played rook e7. That bishop on g3, very poor piece. And well, I like to move f4 though. We're talking about how bad that bishop is. Now let's try to open things up. And whoa, getting tactical. Bishop coming to g6. That king could get mated, but it has the g7 square for now.
Yeah. Oh, this is, I mean, the rook, the problem is the rook on e2 just
the rook on d6 was hanging.
It was hanging.
Oh, but it's mate on h7. So you have
to take on g6. Take your rook's hanging. Now he sees it.
Oh, wait, why did he take the pawn instead of the bishop?
F5, E3. He's still got a lot of pawns here.
He does, but he could have taken a bishop and he took a pawn there. That was an F4. Who's better?
I have no idea. Look at these rooks. They're not coordinated very well.
Oh my gosh. 2 seconds, and now that pawn on B2. Take F3 or take the B2 pawn? I'm not sure which is better. F3. F3. What is happening here?
F2. That the rook is hanging, but rook takes B1.
But then bishop D4?
What are these pawns?
I don't know. Oh my god.
That black is winning. It's going to be, we got to go E2 and bishop C3.
Oh, here it comes. Okay, so what now?
King C4, bishop C3.
Oh, that's so nice. And then E2 check.
Yeah.
What a game.
He wins. He's down a rook.
Oh gosh, and Levy kind of laughs it off, but uncomfortably so. And Roberto's just like, what did I go through? I went through 8 games in 1.
Oh my goodness. Roberto comes away with the victory from one of the most insane imbalances I've seen for an extended period of time. Sometimes you'll see these imbalances and, they'll just sack for those pawns. But we had a rook versus 3 pawns, Robert, for like 20 moves.
And it all started, Roberto actually hung his rook on d6 for free, and then he was able at least to get first a bishop and then a bunch of pawns for it. So 3 pawns for a rook. Wow, that was a crazy game, and both sides need to calm down because it's only 2 games into the match. It's 1-1, still early stages, and Levy going for a Dutch type of setup, aimed at the e4 square, knight, f5 pawn, bishop on b7, saying no e4 for you. And for Roberto here, well, he's going to have to figure out an exact plan to press forward because you don't just want to sit on the position, you want to open things up at some point.
Yeah, knight e4 has been played, and I mean, I'll just show one of the possibilities. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and the reason I mention this is because the bishop on e4, we've talked about a position like this in some of the London variations in previous matches, but you want to have this pin on the bishop, so if white ever has ideas to move the knight, you always get that trade, which is nice for black. Get rid of that strong bishop on g2, and otherwise, you see how you're kind of holding the bishop on g2 hostage here, and always keeping that trade in reserve.
And we're seeing something similar to that in the game. And it was just happened to be that black took on c3. And well, white has lined the queen and bishop up on the long diagonal. That bishop on e4 sits comfortably in place. Sometimes white goes for something like bishop h3 or rook move and bishop f1 so you can avoid the trade of the light square bishops. And he does move his rook, so maybe bishop f1 could be next. But that bishop on e4 still remains extremely powerful.
Yeah, and let's not forget about this knight on a6. It kind of looks like a weird move, maybe. It was played earlier, but keep in mind, if d5 happens, which makes a lot of sense to open up this bishop, the knight is always ready to jump in knight c5 and then potentially jump in to e4. But forget about that knight on a6 for a second. What about f4 from Levy? He's trying to punch in some threats on the king side without many pieces over there at all.
Yeah, it looks quite committal, although at this point, you don't really want to trade on c3 because you're the one trying to open up an attack. And if you trade on c3, maybe it's your king on g8 that will be in more trouble than anything. So bishop h6 is a move here. And you can say, wait, maybe the next move I'll play g5, g4, open up that f file, get after your f2 pawn. But instead he just goes knight c5, which that seems kind of counterintuitive considering what he's just done with f4 and f takes g3.
Definitely. I'm considering immediately ideas like b4, and why would I be scared of b4? Knight a4. So I'm looking at like maybe pawn d6 and trade the bishops and try to go for an endgame. That is something that I'm sure Roberto is considering. If we think of him stylistically, he knows that the bishops and queens all disappear from the board with one move. Bishop takes g7, and what can I say, Robert? Just I'm in tune with my queen trading friend over here.
You did a perfect job there, and it's a trade happening. Take on g7, queens come off, rook takes d6, and guess what? It's black with that problem on d7. The rook on c1 slides directly over to d1. That knight can hop into e5 at any moment. b4 can be played to kick the knight out of c5. This looks extremely promising for Roberto, and most importantly, it's his style and not Levy's.
Yeah, one thing that I'm just noticing, I'll show it on the board, is like knight to e5 as a potential move. Might run into something like takes on g2, followed by rook takes f2 with cute little tactic there, knight e4 check, and then taking on d6. Now, what's the evaluation of that? I don't know. Might even still be good for Roberto, but doubtlessly something that he has to consider, as actually he's just going to go grab a pawn there.
Well, he went a5 to stop b4, and then rook takes b6 happened, and it's like, well, the cure was worse than the disease because I just dropped my pawn on b6 for free, and my d7 pawn is still backwards, going to be weak, and rook b5 can be played, knight e5, all the same stuff that was happening earlier, and now white has an extra pawn to boot. So this is a very bad situation for Levy. Roberto, he's salivating. It's an end game. Yeah. He's up a pawn. He doesn't even need to trade, but he can. So this is looking good for white in game 3 here.
Looking fantastic, matches his style, and he's just such a technician when it comes to positions like this. Knight d4, I mean, what's the material here? I think it's only one pawn, but it feels like a little bit more than that. Don't forget, it's also a time advantage as well as a position that Roberto is very happy to take his time with and make sure he converts properly. This is his chance to not only bounce back from an insane tactical game, but take the lead in the match from a technical position.
Though we have said that sometimes he gets a little bit too solid, and now Levy plays a4. He's only up one pawn. So if we get into a rook endgame, the knights get trade off, it could be too little of an advantage to win the game. The conversion will be difficult. But I like rook b1, keeping more pieces on the board. And I will say that it may not seem relevant or even noticeable, but the fact that black has an outside pass pawn on the king side could be very annoying. That if you play h5, g5, and h4 at the right moment, you can distract white's forces over to the h file, and then black can try to play on the rest of the board and try to salvage the game.
Mm-hmm. And we see, my opinion, a really, really strong move there, rook to b4. It fixes the pawn on b3, and Levy was hinting that he was about to play e5, kicking the knight away, taking on b3, Roberto said, nope, f4. You're not going to have that one. Levy said, well, actually, yeah, I'm going to have one of them, d5. And he's trying to take advantage of the pin that rook on b4 has against the knight.
And he plays rook c1, but I think the problem with this is knight takes b3. You cannot take on e6 with, even though it's check, because after king f6, now your rook on c1 and your knight on e6 are under attack at the same time. So the tactics don't seem to work out unless I'm missing something there. But I think knight takes e6, king f6 will do. Oh, there's knight c7 there. What a weird position. Now I'm just like confused, and he takes on b3 and what looks like a even by material endgame.
And I think you still have something to play for after rook c7 here. Definitely not completely over. Levy's done a great job to reach this position, down a clean pawn. And when I say clean, I mean like he played a5 and a pawn was just removed from the board in his position. To be here, I mean, full credit to Levy Rozman for making this a position to look forward to. But king h6, this is exactly why I was saying you want to play this position on. I mentioned at the start, one thing we're going to see, Robert, is equal positions where Levy's down on time. And you might think, oh, that's just flagging. Well, the clock is part of things.
And he might get checkmated in a couple moves. G4, G5 for white. There's G4, step one. Black has to play G5. Otherwise, white does so and checkmates, rook takes H7. So G5 for black, then maybe white plays F5. And it's close to stalemate. So if this D pawn goes off the board, you can just give away your rook and that would be a stalemate. But for now, black is in some danger, some very serious trouble. And perhaps it's holdable. It just doesn't look very fun.
No, it doesn't at all. Rook d6 here, king back, pawn takes pawn is a way to win a pawn, Robert. But I don't think Roberto is even considering something like that because it doubles his pawns. He's probably more interested in either something slower like e3 or just f5. There is not going to be a stalemate. There's two mobile pieces and pawns on the board, so it would take a miracle to get rid of all of that at once. And remember, he always has rook d6 check to get rid of a stalemate in case Levy ever tries to just get rid of all his pieces at once.
It's a good call. And he's thinking, which leads me to believe that he might actually try to win this pawn with like a rook d6 check, and after king g7, then take on g5. But that doesn't feel like it gives you any winning chances. I don't like the presence of the double pawns. And he plays e3. That's a tricky move. Inviting g takes f4. Hey, now instead of losing a pawn, black can trade pawns. But after e takes f4, the threat of g5 check is still alive. Now there is a pass pawn in the making regardless. And I think that's a good decision considering Levy's clock.
I think I would still say that g takes f4 is the move to play. And after pawn takes, just go rook d3 check. As long as the king is not, close to those two pawns, I think that Levy can manage the defense with just his king in front of him.
Yeah, he should be able to hold this. He has 42 seconds, so he's down quite a bit on the clock, but plenty of time remaining to salvage this. And, well, he says rook d1, I'll keep the status quo. If king to e2, kicking the black rook from the d5 pawn, then the rook goes over to g1 and attacks the g4 pawn. So a trade will benefit black's chances of holding. So that would be a situation that Levy would be completely comfortable with.
Yeah, and the only other real try is something like f5. And keep in mind, you may consider at some point e4, just because you can see that it's pinned. But at the moment, with the king on f3, pawn takes pawn is going to be a check. So it'd be a kind of a disaster move there. And we see king e2. I think rook g1 is going to be punched in, and there it is.
Only move, I think, and the king back to f3 just to defend. Then we'll see rook back to d1. And I don't think we will see a draw by repetition at this point, but that's what Levy is aiming for. Just annoy the g4 pawn. The king has to go back to defend, then go right back to d1 to defend your weak pawn on d5.
But, I mean, this is exactly what you want if you're Roberto. Remember, Levy had like a minute and change, and Roberto had 3 minutes. Well, that's changed to a minute and 30 seconds. I know that, technically Levy might have gained time on the clock, but okay, well, with that move, I think we are pretty much going for I was going to say just going for a draw, but it seems like both guys are trying to get fancy here.
Yeah, king g6, probably not incredibly necessary, but the point was if rook takes h7, there could have been a rook g7 check with a trade or a win of the rook if you're not careful. So he goes king g6. He just wants to take all the pawns in a row. Rook takes g4, rook takes g5 next. And after king f3, rook f1 check. The king will have to go away from these g pawns at some point, and thus black is holding on.
Yep, and I think we've reached total equality. And in fact, so much equality that they've just agreed to a draw right there. No need to play it out. So I got to give a lot of credit to Levy there for handling that position. That was quite something, Robert. He was a clear pawn down against someone who, we might both agree is well suited to take home that full point, and he wasn't able to against Levy's defense.
Have to give praise to Levy's defense, but I think I need to be critical about Roberto's play because he had such a dominating position and then he went for trades. And it's not like he lost all of his advantage. No, of course not. He still was better. But I think he does that where he just gets in this mindset of let me play solidly so I don't have to get any tactics to worry about. Let me just trade, stay up a pawn. And that can backfire in these situations when there are not too many pieces remaining. So I do believe that Roberto is playing excellent chess. I just think that there are times where he is too risk averse.
Yeah, completely agree. And that's our tough job up here, Robert. We get to be critical like that because we can see the type of play that's required in every position. But that's the thing about chess. Everyone has styles. So while his style may have been the reason that he didn't get the full point there, it's also going to be the reason why he's getting full points elsewhere. So that's just how styles cause different people to calculate and be comfortable with different lines. But we're into the next game. It's 1.5. So this could be a very a pivotal match here. Is we're waiting for someone to take the lead again. And Roberto has never had the lead in the match so far. He's playing his coveted Caro-Kann. Robert, is he going to be able to get a win with the black pieces here?
And I'm looking at the pawn structure. We have the bathtub on the king side, right? From e5,
Yeah.
f4, g4, h5. And that's a lot of space gained for white. But look at black darting the king over to the other side of the board saying, well, what attack are you going to have when my king's over there? And often you attack not just to checkmate, but to gain space, open files, and then take advantage. Here, it's not so easy to accomplish that. And if white isn't careful, black will break in the center with a timely move like f6. I would probably put my king on b8, even if it's not required here. I made this reference last time I'm on, but building good habits, when you castle queenside, you often want to tuck your king closer to the corner, right?
Yes, you do. It's almost an automatic move just because that pawn on a7 isn't quite defended and the c file often opens up. So king b8 makes a lot of sense, especially here. It would allow the knight to also go to c8 potentially. An a6 played an ultra solid move. He is looking at stuff like c5, but he wanted to play a6 first, so that there's definitely no knight b5, which would have been catastrophic to allow.
Certainly the case. And now knight f3. So Levy has developed all of his minor pieces. Roberto's bishop on f8 still stuck back there. f6 is a consideration. c5 for sure. I still would think about king to b8. I want to get my king out of there, even if there's no big deal with playing c5 and the king's safe. King b8 just looks like a good move. And it also opens up rook c8 if you want to bring more pieces on the c file as the position starts to open.
Well, queen takes a5 is at least the first thing that's coming to my mind. That is a free pawn, and it's with a check. Now, I think that you would think twice about this, Robert, because you're taking a pawn on the queen side. It's where your king is. It's gonna be an open line against you. However, it's kind of hard to refuse a pawn like that with check.
It is, but for Roberto, he wants no part of that because it opens up a file, which means that there could be sacrifices on the a6 square in front of his king. So I would not be in the business of taking that. After queen takes a5, there could even be b4 as the response. Take another pawn with check, why don't you? I'm just trying to open lines for my rooks. And of course, Roberto says, yeah, I'm good. Thanks for the offer, but I have enough pawns. Don't need yours. So he plays knight c8, opens up the bishop for c5. He can also play bishop h7 to e4 at some moment, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it can be a bit annoying for white to deal with that just because you never know, is black going to take on f3? Is you're just trying to put a piece in the center and then have you figure out what to do? I'm not quite certain how white progresses in this position either.
I think that after knight c8, Roberto's also hinting at the move c5 again, where he's got the knight and bishop supporting it. One thing that I'm looking at is c3 and b4. If Levy gets the move b4 in, he's got complete domination on the queen side. I would be thinking as black that c5 here might be my last chance to play a move like that. As white, I think there's something to be said for just b4, queen d2, and long castling, putting your king on the queen side where it's out of danger. Instead, he goes rook h3, getting out of that pin from the bishop on e4. But I'm waiting for b4 here. I think that could be pivotal.
And that's why Roberto played g6 because of your idea of b4. Is white just claiming all the space on the queen side. So let me fight for some on the king side. And I like the move g6, knight to d2 played, and Roberto just takes on h5 so quickly. He had that mentally pre-moved. And if knight takes e4, you can probably throw an h takes g4, hitting the rook on h3. The intermezzo is actually quite a fascinating one.
Yeah, and we're going to get a position where there might be a pawn on e4 that white is interested in capturing, but it could be met with something like f5, guarding the pawn. And if you take knight takes f6, suddenly position gets a little bit open, and there's a king sitting on e1. I'm not too sure where that king feels safe. Is it going to be the king side? Well, definitely not. And the queen side, well, once you maybe castle queen side, don't forget that pawn on a5 is still hanging.
Wow. And this position is rich, and it's almost funny that with the position opening up, you'd expect the bishops to be happy, but the king is on e1. So opening up the position, probably not too favorable for white just yet. And f5 played, your move him on. If en passant, e takes f6, and the knight captures, and he goes back bishop e2. But now black is up a pawn. Granted, it's this h6 pawn, which can't move and is isolated. So if I'm Roberto, I'd probably play knight e7, try to get my knight to d5, just advance in the position, because the bishop on f8 may not. I forgot about that pawn, and he takes it. I completely forgot about that pawn's existence.
I think the knight is going to end up on c5 here. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Knight c5, something like takes, b takes, opening up another file. And then with this solid pawn mass in the middle, we might just see the rook slowly relocate to the queen side and just a full-on attack.
And Roberto is looking at his e6 pawn. That one's hanging now. I think, well, you don't really have a choice. You don't play. He plays rook e8, but I don't think you want to play that move. He's latching on to that e6 pawn as it also defends the f5 pawn. But I would have just brought my knight out, like knight to b6, knight to d5, try to get quick play. There is a white king still in the center. It may not seem easy to attack, but if my knight ventures up to the d5 square, then eventually I get a rook g8 type of move, I could see white's king getting in some trouble.
Absolutely. And this is all going to come down to, I think, that d5 square. After knight to c5, there are a lot of sacrifices heating up. I think you've got to get rid of that knight because a6 is hanging to, multiple pieces here. And don't forget that e pawn is hanging as well. Knight takes e6 is actually the bigger threat.
And he takes the knight. I wasn't quite sure how he would take because the bishop on f8 now stinks. It does protect the h6 pawn. And I'm looking, a6 is hanging. So that is for stars. He plays king a8. He fortunately has knight a7 next because bishop takes a6 would lead to a checkmate if not for the knight being able to block on a7. And Amon, it's kind of funny, but the pawn being on h6 may be super important for rook h7 defending the 7th rank.
That's crazy, but that's the foresight you need in a position like this because it's all hands on deck in terms of defense. Keep in mind the time. Let's not forget there's an extra minute here for Roberto, but I'm loving Levy's position. I know that the engine is sort of favoring black here, but I just feel like white's center is so solid. And you might say, hey, there's a pass pawn on the A file, pass pawn on the H file. Well, yeah, but neither of those pawns can actually move right now. What's more important is why didn't he play king c2? Just get out of the middle of the board.
And he must have forgotten that pawn could be captured because of the pawn structure being the way that it was. It seemed like my pawns are invincible. You can't take those. They're protected by pawns. And yet one goes down. The bishop should probably move away from c5. You don't have to just yet because this pin still exists, but that bishop should move away. And honestly, I still don't mind white's position because there are all these attacking chances.
All right, Robert, how many pawns can Levy lose before you don't like his position?
Well, he's threatening rook takes a6 check and queen b8 checkmate. So bishop a7, that's a good choice. What about the bishop sack on a6? Can you get away with it? I don't know if it works, but I'm looking at it thinking if we take on a6, you capture back my rook lands there. I'm threatening queen b8 checkmate. I'm threatening rook b1 to a1, things of that nature. d5 becomes a possibility. It's just a wild position.
Yeah, I just showed your checkmate, queen b8 mate, which is easy to overlook in positions like that. And king e1, now he gets out of the way, but I'm worried that he might be choosing the wrong side here. Hey, look, you mentioned it earlier. Rook h7, like just put that rook on that 7th rank and you'll always have it there. And there it is. I mean, Robert, that's the Grandmaster foresight. You saw that move earlier and now it comes into play.
it was necessary to see that because this pin on the A file, the pressure on the B file, now your queen is free to go if you want to. And you can also use the G file to your advantage. I don't see how white plans to attack here. You put the pawn C4, but you don't have a pawn going to B5. And in fact, C4 eliminates your sacrifice on A6. I think you could play a move like rook G8. You could also play H5, H4, H3, H2, and go queen that pawn.
Seriously, H5 might be like the most annoying move to face because you got 4.3 seconds. You have to identify a way to deal with a very simple plan. Roberto's got a solid position. I think he knows he's not getting mated by any sacrifice here. That's why the position is like -5. That's almost like being up a rook. And the reason the position is as bad as that is because the king is sort of, it went to D2. Now it's back to E1. Is it going to go to F2? Well, then, Queen E7 might make it go back to E1. So there's no safe place for that king. And there's H5. This is tough to meet.
And he's going to sacrifice an A6 out of necessity. He doesn't really want to, but he's going to have to just to create some threats. But you've also, look at your bishop on E3. It's behind the pawns, and you needed the threat of D5 at some point to do anything. And now that knight's coming into D5, and well, that's that.
So you mentioned it. He's sacking out of necessity, and you know why? Because black was about to play knight D5, which is pretty much resignable. If black achieves that, ruins everything in your position, and basically if bishop A6 doesn't work now, it's going to work never.
Right. Bishop comes back to D2. It needs to go to A5 to B6. That's a long journey. And queen B7 offering a queen exchange. Not so fast. Queen A2 is a very good move. Now the queen should go to G7 all the way to the other side of the board because you're threatening a mate attack on G1.
And I think rook E to E7 is also one of those moves that just covers everything and gets over to B, and he does play it. It's just safe moves. He doesn't need to be anything except safe in this position.
Yeah, I'm looking at how to counterattack. You're just saying, hey, just be safe. Different. Look at this. Bishop B6. That's scary. And he's 6 seconds. He doesn't have that much time. He took that?
Well, at this point, you have to take.
He's losing. He's definitely losing.
There's rook A8 here. He barely has moves.
And he lost his queen because he unfortunately took things and Levy broke it open. Credit to Levy for staying in this. And now they're in a bullet scramble. Queen 8's mate. Oh, checkmate missed.
King C8? Now he's going to see it, though.
Yeah, he's going to see
it. Now he sees it.
And he wins by resignation. And wow, that was a critical moment because Levy takes a lead. And we're actually going to head into our halfway break. That game was Roberto's for the taking. And yet he took on B6. And that's what cost him that game. Amon, what a turnaround.
That was insane. That was actually crazy. I don't know what the evaluation of that game was, but it felt like it was in double digits. Like that game was over, done. There was an extra piece on the board. There was actually 2 passed pawns. There were a couple moves from becoming brand new queens, Robert. And full credit to Levy because I have to say, Roberto missed something there, but Levy stayed in that game. He had like 1 second for 20 moves or something, Robert. I don't know how he did it, but he's leading this match right now.
Honestly, can Levy get the white pieces every game and Roberto with black? Because we've seen some wild affairs. There was a rook for 2 and then 3 pawns, and then finally a victory for Roberto. We just saw that last game where black was up 3 pawns, then a piece with the passed pawns, and yet Levy was the one who broke through and delivered a checkmating attack. So what a wild state of games we've seen thus far. We're going to be right back for more from this I'm Not GM Speeches Championship Final, brought to you by Chess.com. And we are back. We have the players on screen here. Roberto doing a little chiropractic exercises, cracking the neck. Levy, he's sitting there just wondering what that game was. And Amon, you have the information for us because it was wild. The time was ticking down. Yeah. What happened there at the end?
Crazy. I mean, you can just see the evaluation bar almost, fully down there. It was -10, and I think just simply H4. You mentioned it as almost a joke. Like black's position is so solid, he can play H4, H3, H2, H1. Well, I think that was actually the answer, Robert. That's all that needed to happen here. The amount of moves that are required to make a threat for Levy, it's just too many. You need the rook, you need the bishop, you need the bishop again. And by that time, that pawn, it's getting a queen and it's with check. With 1.9 seconds, it's just crazy to me that he was able to turn that game around and actually win it. We'll see how recovered Roberto is after that shocking defeat.
Well, he looks locked in. I'm looking at his expressions on his face. He's ready to play. And we have another Dutch. We saw that earlier. Roberto had a great position. He actually won a pawn, and then Levy did well to hold that in the end game. But I think that Roberto has no problems repeating based on the position he was able to obtain.
Yeah, he's saying, you want to give me a pawn, and I'm either going to win or draw that game for the rest of the match. Yeah, sign me up. I'll be here all day.
And we have a difference in this game. A5 played by Levy instead of knight A6, which we saw in the previous game. And this
Mhm.
looks more normal because black is able to counter on the queen side, although white can still play the move D5, trade off those dark square bishops. And I'm much more concerned about black's king than anything.
Yeah, and I think the move b4 is a bit reactive. Like after a4, you almost feel like it's compulsory. You have to do something with the b pawn. Either you take or you push. But completely agree there, Robert. D5 seemed like the move because you basically lock the bishop back from the b7 square, trade those pieces, and you know what? You're trading the pieces before Levy has a chance to play e6, queen e7. So there's no queen coming over to g7 to trade as well. It's actually just getting rid of the only piece in front of black's king. All of a sudden, we might see a quick turnaround and an attack.
And even when black plays e6, there's this thematic idea of playing d5. Sometimes it costs you a pawn, but you get the activity. And Roberto continuing to play very solid chess, b4, then a3, locking up the queen side. And perhaps that a4 pawn, which was trying to break open the position, is just going to become a target as the game continues because it's on a square that's away from the remaining black pawns and can be attacked in the future.
Yeah, no, this is a3. He doesn't want to see a3 from black at any point. Basically, he wants to connect the pawn chain. These guys are all working together. c5, something they will all defend each other. And d6. So I like this a lot more from Levy. He's changing things up from a previous position that didn't go his way. We see the adaptations. I wonder if that's something he looked at in the break because a5, a4, and it looks like he wants to get the knight to d7 instead of a6. I think that's much improved.
Certainly is. And again, white can consider this d5 move. It's thematic. You want to think about it every single turn. He is 50 seconds ahead on the clock, Roberto. And so he can play d5, but I would think before making it because that changes the entire nature of the game. I just think that you have to do something. You can't just sit and wait and shuffle your pieces around. You need to play d5. You just played rook to d1.
And I'll just put a move on the board here, rook f to e1, knight d7, and bishop f1, just to illustrate a point that you brought up earlier. This is a way for white to avoid the trade here, and I'll just play king h8 to display the intentions. You bring the knight back. Of course, you don't want to lose the bishop for the knight if you're black, and then white might get a move like e4 in, and then bring the bishop back. And it might look like, Robert, why would I waste like 5-6 moves just to not trade these bishops? That's how powerful it is. He doesn't do that at all, but that is the main consideration to keep the bishop on g2. He says, look, knight d2, I'm fine going for trades. What do you make of this position?
He's fine going for trades. Absolutely shocking. I've never heard that from his own mouth, but that's what Roberto does. He sticks to his guns here. And look at this position. The a4 pawn, still a target. e4, an idea for white at some point, but black could counter with f4. We saw Levy doing that in an earlier game where he played f4 even before white pushed the e pawn, so he may consider that. And I actually think that white has a very stable position, and it's harder for black to play precisely because of that a4 pawn. Your rook on a8 would love to go rook to e8, but then you drop the pawn on the spot. So you need to figure out what to do with respect to that a4 pawn.
Yeah, and I was going to say there are a few other thematic moves. Speaking of d5 for white, d5 for black or b5 for black, even though it's a pawn sacrifice, both of these moves make a lot of sense because you're trying to entice the move c5, and slowly but surely, this bishop on b2, it's getting worse and worse. The more pawns are appearing on the dark squares, and that's a dark square bishop. So keep in mind that as this game transitions closer and closer to an endgame, Robert, those bishops, I think black is going to be happier with the way that the pawn complexion is developing.
And you've control over the e4 square, so no pawn break into center. You're absolutely correct. The bishop on b2 staring into its own pawn. The bishop on g7 can even switch diagonals to h6 at some point. And if you play c5 for white, then black can consider b5 closing down that side of the board. So Roberto keeping the tension alive, that's very smart. He can play knight f3 now because that knight would like to jump into e5 with tempo since the rook is there. And actually, at some point, c takes d5, queen c6 looks like an option. So I would start with knight f3 right now with the idea of knight e5, and if not, cd, queen c6, the rook on a8, the pawn c7, the pawn a4, all under attack.
Love the move knight f3 from you and Roberto, the Roberts and the Robertos teaming up here. Rook f7, it just looks like knight f3 is the perfect reaction to that move. You're immediately threatening two moves that are just going to cause us to go back to f8. And then, as you said, pawn takes pawn potentially, opening up on the c7 pawn. So rook f7, I wasn't a big fan of that move from Levy, especially because the position is sort of closed off. There's no open file. It's not like you're doubling on the open f file. Everything's closed there for the moment. So it seems like Levy is a little bit caught playing defense here. A4 pawn, c7 pawn are things you're going to have to watch for the rest of the game.
And just the control of the c file, in addition to the c7 pawn being a target, is so nice for white. And once the knight gets to e5, black has trouble taking it. You can even bring your bishop to capture, or your knight to capture it, but after d takes e5 at some moment, the d5 pawn is a weakness that has to have an eye kept on it. So I think that Levy's in big trouble. And look at the clock, an extra minute for Roberto. Levy has done pretty well on the clock in some games. In others, he's been down to the waning seconds and still wins, like in game 4 that we saw just before the break. But that extra minute should play a part in this one. b5, by the way, and getting the knight to c6 also looks good.
I heard everything you said there, partner. Just had my headphones unplugged for a sec. So trust me, I agree with everything. I agree with everything. You made fantastic points. And you know what? That's why Robert's the grandmaster, guys. Listen to him. Pawn e3, and I'm jumping right back in here. What the heck is queen e8, rook e7? This is like one of these types of batteries on an e-file, but it's completely closed off.
It is, and you would like to see c takes d5 and then the situation open up, but even that should favor white. I actually like the move c takes d5 because you're opening the c file, the c6 squares, your knights for the taking. And I had mentioned, I know you heard me, but I'll just reiterate that b5 for white instead of pawn e3 was an option to plant the knight on c6. So perhaps Roberto will regret that to some extent, because if the knights get traded, he can't put a knight on c6. It's gone from the board.
Yep, knight g4, and I think that if we get mass trades, for example, like taking on d5, taking on e5, even if the position is equal, or Roberto could even be down a pawn in some cases, just that a4 pawn, d5 pawn, c7 pawn, there's gonna be so many weaknesses, and white's pawn structure is intact, everything's covered. I think that Roberto has the better position here quite clearly, and it's also trending towards one of those end games where you might have one extra pawn and trying to press an advantage home.
And Roberto retreats his knight to f3. If we can just bring up the analysis board for a second. If he left that knight on e5 and had played rook to d1, rook f1 to d1, just an example. After knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, white's position is still excellent. You have an attack on the d5 pawn, you're hitting the c file, the a4 pawn is still weak, exactly what you were talking about. So he brings the knight back, which is not a bad move. It's just this curious decision, and I wonder where he's going to go to next.
Yeah, I think he just looks at the move knight g4 and says, you know what? I don't want to even validate that move by allowing a trade at all. I want to say I can kick that knight with h3, then it goes back, and then I can maybe return to the e5 square on my terms. h6 has been played by Levy. This looks like a nice, calm move. You don't need to do anything crazy. He just needs to get a move off, and now he's evened up the time on the clock as well.
And look at Roberto. This is the most Roberto move of them all. Queen c6, just trading queens, but he's taking advantage of black's h6 move. That g6 pawn is tender. And so queen c6, yeah, the queens can trade. The d5 pawn's under attack. Everything is sort of vulnerable in black's camp. But if the queens get traded, that rook on c6 will attack the g6 pawn, and then rook f to c1 next. The c7 pawn's in big trouble.
Yeah, and there was actually a sort of mini threat, rook takes e3 in the previous position. So queen c6, not only a good move for many other reasons, but also getting out of that as well. Can you even refuse the queen trade here? Queen d8, queen takes g6. I don't think there's a good way to do it unless, like you're going rook d7 or something ridiculous. But how quickly did he play queen takes queen there, Robert?
And I don't think he needed to. That's the thing, is he did it, and it's still good for white. But I'm guessing he had more if he had spent some time. But he is so quick to trade the queens, and he also is up 50 seconds on the clock. Rook f to c1, rook c8, rook takes b6, wins a pawn. So he's actually taking this game.
Yeah, he should be. F4, why is that move played? You might see the evaluation bar just, taking off on the runway there. Well, he just has to do something. The position is locked up. We might even see knight takes e3 here. As crazy as that move is, just because he needs to have something to play for. It's a terrible, terrible game positionally speaking.
Yeah, f4 is one of those, hey, maybe Roberto's pre-moving some kind of rook move and I can win a pawn this way. Levy knew his position was very bad, so he essentially was resigning and just trying to create a tactical opportunity. And for Roberto, credit to him, because we do criticize some of his decisions. We talk about how he could be a bit too solid in some situations, but he
Yep.
never let go of his advantage. So he had
No.
the lead throughout that one. He just ground Levy down to the point where he had no good moves to look at.
Yeah, and we've talked, as you mentioned, about being too solid, but that's an example of where his solid play got him the win, maybe easier than an attacking player might have. So that's it paying off there. And this line actually kind of interesting. I'm just going to go back for a second here, and talk about this move, bishop to d7, because it looks so weird. Like, why would you bring your bishop out and then immediately bring it back into d7 and play e6 and lock it in? I mean, don't we all play bishop h7? Well, after bishop h7, usually white often goes for this move e6, and it looks crazy. But after this, these pieces are all kind of locked away on the king side. You see that evaluation bar creeping up there, and it's going to get better and better. So that's why Roberto played the bishop back, which looks completely like an anti-Caro-Kann move.
Could never be Roberto playing that bishop h7 e6 line. Absolutely never. No way. If you showed me his name, I would say it's a forgery. He is not playing variations like that. He would much rather have his pieces a bit restricted. Look at that bishop on d7, kind of staring into its pawns, then allow some kind of tactical sequence of that nature. And I respect that a lot about Roberto's style. Yes, there are some moments, maybe he should go for more, but in the opening stage, he knows the positions that he wants to strive for. He ends up accomplishing that. And look at Levy playing f4, g4. I mean, this is fine. Look at the evaluation bar. It still thinks white's doing well. But from a strategic point of view, it's difficult to throw all your pieces forward. And if you don't find that knockout or that way to infiltrate in the position, you start getting frustrated. And there's no taking moves like f4 and g4 back.
That's true. But if there's one thing I've learned from this opening, is that you can never count out Levy Rozman based on the evaluation that he was able to withstand the last time that they played.
That's true. He did survive a tough one there. It is a 2.5 match. These players thus far, even on the scoreboard, playing a pretty level match throughout. The only thing that has not been level, and there's no surprise here, is the clock.
Yep. This is a common theme, commonality. It's a full minute ahead for Roberto. We had that, flash of hope early on when Levy had the advantage, but I think that lasted about 10 seconds, and he hasn't gone back to it. After bishop b5, I'm looking at the move queen to d4 as a potential move, like let's say queen takes d4, bishop takes b5, check, throw that move in before you take the queen back for a nice little tactic.
That's awesome. We had one like that in the Greg versus Levy match when I was talking about some queen b6 move or something. So that's a good spot by you. The queen is the only piece defending the bishop. That bishop would be captured with check. So after queen d4, black actually has to move the queen back, and instead Levy plays c3. But Roberto quickly gets rid of that light square bishop. This is turned from a Caro-Kann into a French-like idea. Right. And what do you think about the bathtub formation for white?
I think that generally speaking, if the middle of the board is opened up, I'm maybe less of a fan. The knight's going to come to e7. I wasn't necessarily sure if knight c6 was the best way to go, but bishop e3, if you can, basically it all comes down to the e5 pawn. If you can secure that pawn and get castled safely, f5 is going to happen. But for now, Roberto, he's getting developed, but I'm not liking how many tempi he's giving Levy and the easy development that white's able to get.
And where is black going to castle? Because look at a4. I was about to say, if you castle queenside, here comes a4, b4, etc. And if you castle kingside, well, you don't really need me to tell you what's going to happen. Look where the pawns are. They're going to start going up the board. However, castling kingside, if white plays g5, knight f5 is available. And if white tries to play f5, that e5 pawn loses a very important defender, its pawn, and the king's on e1 still. So, d4 by Roberto. That is a tactical move trying to solve his problems, giving himself the d5 square. That's a French-like solution to this position, although I do believe white can take the pawn and claim a legitimate edge.
Wow, that is a very surprising move. Like, how important is that center pawn? Usually that is the backbone of the position here, whether it's a French or a Caro-Kann. It's all about that d5 pawn. And just playing d4, giving up a central pawn like that, it's clear to me that Roberto was thinking about castling after the move a4. He's probably like, I want to castle kingside, but he was looking at moves like knight d4 by white, blockading maybe, and just f5, f6, not the type of position he wants to defend. But Robert, can you give up a pawn and then think for like a minute afterwards? This seems unprepared.
I wouldn't advise that, but Roberto is a very strong player, so I would say he knows what he's doing. So it's clear that he also is kind of confused at what's happening based on the fact that he just gave away a pawn and is thinking for a long time. So the good news for him is that Levy's king is in the center. The bad news is kind of everything else, that he's no longer up on time. He's down a pawn. Those pawns are all defended. He can't castle in either direction without seeing an attack happen. So yeah, I think Levy is much, much better here and playing very well.
Knight d5. Now, that to me is a logical follow-up. I mean, giving up a pawn like that, well, hey, let's actually use the square that pawn used to be on for some of the pieces that are remaining. Knight d5, hitting the bishop, looking at that f-pawn. Again, this is one thing I mentioned, that e-pawn needs to be secure before you can play f5. So I don't think that we're going to be seeing, moves like f5 punched in immediately. Knight takes c6 played, and is he just going to keep this bishop and prevent castling with bishop c5? That's what I'm looking at.
Oh, it's going from bad to worse. If that bishop gets to c5, you cannot castle. It will not be legal. And that bishop can go into d6. The white pawn can go to c4 to kick the knight out of d5. This is horrible position.
Yeah, this is really, really bad. Anything but bishop c5 would surprise me here, because bishop c5, you get into d6, you stop castling. Long castle, I know it looks insane, but hey, there it is. You got to do something that gets the rook to the open file. I mean, it's an attempt. Queen a6, what do you think of long castle, Robert?
Yeah, open file for now, but after bishop d6, how open is that file? I'm just going to plant my bishop there. If you exactly exchange, which you may feel obligated to do because your position is that bad at this point, but that's still going to be good for white very clearly. And if you don't sacrifice your rook for the bishop on d6, then my bishop is planted in your face, and I'm still going to go attack you and probably going to succeed.
Yeah, there's either bishop d6, there's queen a6, long castling by white. Looks like there's no pawns in front of the king, but they're there. They're just a little bit further away. The main thing is that Roberto has no way to come close to attacking a white king on c1. So I think Levy's king could be safe on e2, f2, c1. It's up to him. He's got a great position here, and despite only being up one pawn, he's got a serious advantage.
And f6 is a good move. He needs to do something like that. And Levy down half a minute on the clock. And that's going to be Roberto's chance. And can he take on e5? He can't take a second time because queen a6 check will be a problem. So, yeah, you're not even winning the pawn. Then you're opening the f file. The rook on f1 says, hello, happy to be here. And it's just...
Well, the f file is going to be tough because you can't even challenge it. He's like, hello, happy to be here. You can't even say hello back.
How rude. And... yeah, this is a sad-looking position, and this would be a very big win for Levy because Roberto just evened up the score, and if Levy can take this one, and it's a very one-sided game, I might add, that he'll be thrilled about his chances.
Yeah, king b7. Now, I am a fan of this one. The reason is that it finally gets rid of queen a6. That move has been lingering in the position for a while. It's finally gone. As winning as this game is, as much as the engine is saying, oh, then wrap it up, pack it up, go home, I still think that Roberto has some outside chances, as there are some lingering tactics, and knight against bishop, if we get to a certain type of endgame, there's still some hope, in my opinion.
Well, he plays queen f7, doesn't want to sacrifice the exchange, which is what I was thinking about on the d6 square. Yeah, it's not clear how white breaks through and just checkmates black. If that's the case, for now, for example, f5 comes to mind. My queen's in f7, yeah. I want to go win some of your pawns on the king side, open the board up, and f5, there he goes. That's at least a chance, and 45 seconds left for Levy.
Yeah, and if you see a move like b5, which might be a good response, there's rook c8, the king can hide on a8. If you open the position up over there, it might get worse and worse for your king. Remember, as soon as f takes g4 later on, there's queen takes on f4 with a check, trading. This can definitely still flip around despite that big evaluation.
And rook c8 played down to 35 seconds is Levy. And this is a complex position. I see the eval bar is sky high, but I don't believe that. And I don't think the players know that. Levy knows he's better. He's up a pawn, but look at his king on c1. It's now in the open. And if you take on c6, rook takes c6, that rook patrols the sixth rank. It can go to b6 if it wants. The other rook can come to c8. And then white is the one who seems like he's less safe.
Yeah, and I mean, at the f4 pawn is loose here. And I think that taking on c6 is sort of like a pseudo threat, but you could react with king a8. The queen covers b7 checkmate. So there's ways to just play pawn takes pawn, and he does that.
Wow, that is a brave choice and a good choice. And he plays c4 kicking the knight, can you just keep going? Knight takes f4. The queen on f7 does defend the b7 square, like you said, but I am worried about the black king. I have to be honest. That looks quite scary. Although at this point you've committed to it, you probably have to take knight takes f4.
I would do it quickly. I mean, at the end of the day, we're getting in a bullet time scramble. I don't like that move because now pawn takes pawn is a winning threat.
Okay, but he plants his knight on b6, and if c5, queen a4, there's just pawn takes b6. The queen is defended on b3 very importantly. Otherwise, black would get away with this tactically because the white queen would be.
But you know what he might be doing is after pawn takes pawn, I think he's going to play king takes. That's what's crazy. After c5, maybe you just go knight takes a4.
Wait, but what's happening now? Because wait, this rook on c1's hanging, so you can't play cb5, and now rook takes c4.
Just take rook is loose.
Oh, I didn't even. But the d3 rook is loose too. Wow, what a weird position.
I was going to say queen e4 looked like a great move, but c5, the counterpunch, hits the knight and defends the rook on d3.
And he wins the time.
Oh my!
He wins the time, and Levy shakes his head and gives a little laugh there. But that was maybe payback for the earlier game where Roberto had Levy on the clock and lost that game up a piece. But I don't even know what to say.
Wow, Robert, we have seen. I mean, Levy time and time again. It's that time pressure and whether he can handle it. We were saying that game should have been over from the beginning, but I was maintaining that outside chance because the knight on d5 was so strong. And although Levy was prosecuting his advantage, he was using a lot of time to do so. And it became tougher and tougher to handle a complicated position with low time on the clock. That's going to be for any player. It doesn't matter how good you are at calculating with low time. I mean, the point is we all play better when we have more time to calculate.
Right, and illustrated by what we were doing, it's hard to juggle the complicated position in front of you and the clock situation. So Levy was trying to figure it out, and then you can forget about your time, just how little you have remaining. And for Levy, that's a big, big loss there. He's now down a point. He will not have the advantage in bullet like he has in previous matches. I think that the players are about even in bullet. Their ratings are both around 2,800. So for Levy, you don't want to see this tilt out of hand. You want to just say, okay, this match has been back and forth. We both are playing pretty exciting chess. Let's just keep calm here. This is still a match. We're in the first time control. It feels like we've been here forever, honestly. But this is the first time control.
It's true. There's so much chess ahead. However, you speak about that first time control. This is very likely going to be the last game in that first time control. So, I mean, the ideal situation, if you're Levy Rozman, is obviously leveling this match, going into the break equal, because we've had some insane games, both tactically, on the clock, stylistically. It's been a real treat so far. But for these players, maybe on both ends, to go in evened up, maybe that's the best that they can ask for, because it's been a roller coaster of emotions for both of them so far.
And look at Roberto. He's trying to figure out his emotions right now. He's got his head in his hands.
Not like this.
Not like this, indeed. And, well, maybe like this because he just scored the victory. So he wants more of that. And
maybe that's the way.
I like his position with the white pieces, the pin on the c6 knight. But Levy is ahead on the clock. So there's something about this Queen's Gambit accepted that is in Levy's wheelhouse. And despite the good center for white, the development, the pin on the knight c6, the eval bar says, hey, it's completely equal, which actually, to me, means that black should be in very good shape because it looks good for white, and yet it's not that great. The central pawns could be in some trouble.
I mean, yeah, white has a pin, but you fail to realize that black has two of them, and more pins, more wins. That's what they say, Robert. So g4, he actually had to eliminate one of them because look at the pressure that was mounting. Bishop takes f3. The pawn was going to be loose on d4, and black is one move away from choosing which direction he's going to castle. I don't think he's going to pick queenside with bishop takes c6 available, but as soon as he plays kingside castling, there's an e pawn and a d pawn potentially that we're going to be hanging in the center of the board.
Yeah, and bishop g6 now hitting the e4 pawn, so that's a threat. If you castle, bishop takes c3 followed by bishop takes e4 will be a bit of a problem. So I'm expecting queen to e2. And Roberto down a minute on the clock. So something in this opening not going the way he anticipated or wanted, and now he's the one in some time trouble. So this feels like Levy's game to strike back. It's the final game, most likely, of the time control. There are just over 3 minutes left and plenty of time left on the players' clocks. So I think that Levy, if he's careful, if he plays accurately here, he should be able to obtain an advantage based on the loose squares on white's king side.
Totally agree. I think just castle here. There's not many other moves that I'm thinking of. There might be tactics like Queen f4 is another move that I would consider here, but my instinct is just get castled, and then all the tactics will present themselves, whether it's a rook to d8, whether it's queen to f4 to follow up. I'm not sure if there's any need for queen f4 immediately, as if it's such a strong move, but I'm just thinking castling here as a baseline move got to be good for Levy.
Although your queen f4 move tempting tactically because the e4 pawn hit a second time. The knight on c3 can be removed as a defender and it's pinned, so it's not a true defender at the moment. So that's probably what Levy's thinking about, but he needs to keep that lead on the clock. Both moves look very good. You kind of need to choose a plan and maintain the pressure not just on the board, but also on the clock as well.
Yeah, I think queen f4 might be knight d2 might be required just to actually keep that pawn. One thing that I'll point out as a potential way that Levy's position does not end up looking good. And he does play queen f4. I was going to say a position where white gets to play f3 and this bishop on g6 somehow feels completely locked out of the game. So look for something like that, as Roberto's going to need to untangle here. But knight d2, do we have any other moves here, Robert?
I only see knight d2, otherwise you lose a pawn. He does play the move, and black can play h5. Because he is not castled, he can choose to play h5, but then the white king darts to the queen side, and that could be a problem for black because your king has nowhere to hide.
Yeah, you can't match that. Castling queenside for black, there's going to be immediately bishop takes c6, queen a6 ideas. So finally he decides, let's just get castled here, get out of the middle of the board. I'm looking at things like queen e3 as a way to maybe stabilize the center, get out of this pin from the bishop on g6. And the queen on d3, I don't like at all. There's going to be rook d8, bishop g6, all hitting that tender square. I think we just get out of the way and offer a queen trade. I don't think he'll be too upset with that there, Robert. And pawn takes back, strengthens the center.
It does, but it gets rid of your f3 idea. So the bishop on g6 is at least happier that there's no pawn coming to f3 is stabilized. So queen e3 is played. No surprise there, Amon. You called it. Roberto takes the opportunity, as he typically does, to trade queens. And now the question for Levy is, do you trade on e3 or do you drop your queen back either to d or f6 and say, let's keep these queens on the board?
Right, and I think it's reasonable to keep the queens on the board. I mean, queen takes e3, I don't think there's any problem with, but I like the decision to keep the queens on. I think the center is still very tender here. There's going to be a rook d8, and depending on where the white king goes, no matter where, Robert, I'm actually looking at a lot of spicy ways to react. Like if you go kingside, maybe something like f5, h5. These pawn breaks start to come to mind as a way to open up the middle of the board and potentially where that king is going to end up.
And he chooses knight b3 first to defend d4, but you're absolutely correct. The king for white doesn't have a clear home. It probably will end up on the, I don't know. I was going to say the king side, but now I'm not certain. It's like, how do you choose which way the king goes? First of all, black's turn. So black can play a6. I don't think white really wants to take on c6. The queen recaptures, hitting the e4 pawn once more. But what else is there to do in this position? I feel like you could easily kick white back and then play rook d8 and things like that. And well, that's a start.
Yeah, and this position, I think, first of all, it's been a very well-played game by both. But I think Levy is slowly outplaying here. He's got the two bishops. I think we'll see something like rook d8. He might be waiting to see where Roberto's going to place his king before he makes a very committal decision and goes all out with something like h5 or something like a5. I think a5 could be a move that he plays regardless, though, in a position like this.
And you're definitely not castling once a5 is on the board, but you're threatening a4 for black to win the d4 pawn. I like your move. And he plays e5, which I don't like nearly as much. It does help the dark square bishop out, because if white plays d5, then that bishop can eventually get to the c5 square. But I feel like this does help white at least feel safer in the center of the board. Instead of hanging a pawn, you may give up some squares, but you're not going to lose material.
And what do you think about d5, knight a5? I think that might be Levy's intention, trying to like immediately take the dark squares. Basically, you want to play bishop to c5, but you can't do that because of the knight on b3. So knight a5, looking to trade, and then making sure that after a3, you don't have to take your bishop and give it up for the knight on c3. The whole point of e5, as you mentioned, take the dark squares. So e5, knight a5 looks like a way that you can actually still keep that dark square bishop, because d5, knight e7, I might just go a3, and I don't know if you want to give that bishop up.
Yeah, you probably prefer not to, but white's king, I was about to say white's king still in the center, and then he castles queenside, which is the least Roberto move ever, and bishop c5 for black just wins material.
This is just not acceptable. There's no knight b5, there's no knight e2, and there's no other piece that can save that knight. We might even see him just add the pressure, Levy that is, with rook d8, and 30 seconds left. This is a tactical position, just to say the least, and a dead loss tactical position for white. It is an incredible evaluation there. Levy has got this game, and Roberto knows time ticking down. The 5+1 time is expiring, Robert, and it looks like we're going to have a level match.
What a decision. Levy played a very good game and had a better position, but to castle queenside, that is, did somebody take the mouse from Roberto there? That's not a...
Somebody should have taken the mouse from Roberto before he castled, I'll say that.
That's not him, right? He likes to play solidly. He doesn't want to open up the position and get attacked. He must have overlooked the bishop c5 move, and now, well, there must be a bunch of different winning ways. Can I just take on d4 and play c6?
C6, just game over.
Yeah, this is winning a piece.
You have these ideas like knight e7, knight f6, discovered attack, but the queen takes both of them, and that's going to be a little mic drop there from Levy Rozman as you see him get a clean and very, very convincing win at the end of this portion. You mentioned he should just relax after that last game. Remember that these games are all very competitive. He is giving them up on time sometimes, but look at the way he can bounce back. And I think this is an insanely competitive match right now. And what a tactical affair as well.
It's been a great match thus far. Both sides trading blows. And I would say that Levy, his time management has been better in some of the games. He still suffers from that same losing too much time early, doesn't conserve enough for more of the problematic stages later in the game, but he has proven that he is every bit Roberto's equal thus far. On Roberto's side of things, that last game was not a good one from him. He would like to take that one back. He's made some solid choices that honestly probably cost him a half point in that earlier game, but overall both sides trading blows, playing really good chess. I don't see anyone as the favorite going forward. It's really a toss-up.
Yeah, absolutely. We're about to get into the 3-minute portion after this, but first, we're going to jump to break, Robert, because we got to decompress after that. And hopefully when we come back, we have just as exciting games to look forward to. Be right back after this.
Now that we're after the break, we are getting set for 45 minutes of 3-minute plus 1 second increment blitz chess. Amon, that's a faster time control. That is the more normal time control. Events like Title Tuesday use that time control. So what do you think? The players, it's custom for them, but it's hard to adjust sometimes when you have 2 extra minutes to start, now making your way back to 3-minute territory.
Yeah, it's a great point, Robert. I think that the players are going to be a little more comfortable in this format. It's a bit more familiar to them. It's closer to not only 3-minute chess, but it is the, as you mentioned, exact time control of things like Title Tuesday, which I'm sure both of these players have participated in before. So I think we might see the players a little bit more comfortable with their time management, but it also means that whatever, time issues you may have had in 5-minute, I think they're going to be more pronounced in the 3-minute portion. All of a sudden, getting down 1-2 minutes, that's more than half your clock, Robert. You got to be careful.
You can't have those opening things. You need to be well prepared. So that way, if your opponent plays something unexpected, you're not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs, wondering what to do next. You don't have time to calculate in that manner. And it's much closer to bullet chess in earlier stages. So we'll see how the players do here. I think that Levy should have the momentum. He just won that final game. And the players trading off victories. So neither side can take any real lead, just a game here, a game there. But now that we're in the 3-minute portion, we'll see what happens.
Glad we got the close-up there of it looked like Levy was just oiling up the system there, getting those eye drops in, making sure everything's working good. You're going to need those eyes. I hear they're important for some of these chess matches.
Yeah, every now and then you need to use those. But H6, we've seen this before. Of G4, the bishop went back to D7, and Roberto goes right back to that. I wonder if Roberto will stop playing the Caro-Kann. In a match against Lawrence Trent, he was like, Lawrence almost retired my Caro-Kann. And Levy kind of doing something similar. It feels like he, game after game, has a good position.
Yeah, he's really sticking it to him. It's a very aggressive style. I think that it's probably something Roberto looked at, because if he's playing it again, he knows Levy's going for it every single game, and he has to be prepared. So I think it's doubtlessly something he looked at in the break, and he must have something slightly different because he knows the exact setup that Levy's going to go for. What are we going to see? Are we going to see like a C5? And there we go. C5 move again. But if he goes for that bishop b5, we saw how quickly that backfired last time. What is going to be different this time?
So queen d4 can be played. I wonder if Levy looked at it. Just based on time usage thus far, it doesn't look like he did. So queen d4 is that tactical possibility. Either way, Roberto had a tough position. Now we have the same exact setup. Yep. The rook captures, the queen went to d3, bishop to e3. I don't really like this from Roberto's perspective.
Yeah, he's just repeating it again. I'm still waiting for, basically what's going to happen after the knights develop. It's going to be queen d3. If you're Levy Rozman, why are you changing your moves at all? You pretty much had a crush right out of the opening. So if knight e7, bishop e3, queen a5, a4, I'm just waiting for Roberto's new move because I can't imagine that he just sacks the pawn with d4 again.
That didn't end up very well. He won the game, actually, but it was not yes. a good position for him. Let's put it that way. So what can he do here? Can he play queen b6 just to attack the b2 pawn? But after queen b6, rook f2 for white. You attack the pawn. I defended a second time, then played bishop e3 next anyway. I don't know what black should do, and neither does Roberto because he repeated the opening and now is spending time.
That's the worst thing to do in the 3-minute portion. I mentioned how important time is going to be, and if I'm Levy, I'm playing a4 here, and yeah, just show me what you got. Queen c7, there we go. That's the new move, and I think that he made that up about 4 seconds ago.
Extremely logical. When the knight goes from c6 to replace the queen on a5, now the c4 square and the b3 square, because the white pawn is on a4 rather than a2. So there are some opportunities for black. I'm not sure where white's king is going. You don't particularly want to castle queenside when you push your pawn to a4. So you can castle queenside. It just is risky.
Yeah, it is a little bit more open, but as you mentioned, still possible. The other thing is just walking your king to the king side. King f2, king g2 is possible as well. Queen c7, though, putting pressure on e5, dissuading the f5 move, and also Levy is probably waiting for black to commit his king before he decides how he wants to advance his pawns further.
Yeah, the e5 square, very important here. Also, bishop c5, not possible because of knight takes e5, and the queen on c7 will stare down at that bishop there. So the bishop c5, bishop d6, what you want to do, can't do it. And I think black should castle kingside and then push the f-pawn.
Yep, kingside, and then either f6 or f5, probably f6, to guarantee the position starts to open up. We see b4, f6 is looking nearly automatic when the king is sitting on f2 especially.
If you play b5 here, I am sacrificing the piece. It's not even a real sacrifice. I'm winning it back. So he does take on f6. And now the rook lands there. The next rook lands on f8. And I see white has g5 in his future, but that frees up the f5 square. So I don't love that. It's a very committal choice. And I would say, practically speaking, I like black's chances and the clock.
Yep. Can't forget about that thing. The one thing I might say about Levy's position is the timely b5 will pay off because he gains control of the e5 square and the d4 square. So if you do that in the right moment, you can combine knight e5, bishop d4, maybe knight d4, and as long as he utilizes the move b5 at the right moment, kicking that knight away, actually neither black knight has anywhere to go.
So he plays b6, which says if you go b5, the a7 pawn isn't under attack. Maybe he'll go knight a5 into c4. I was thinking, by the way, of d4 for black. We saw him sacrifice a pawn in the earlier game, but knight to d5 in this position? You kidding me? With that king on g2? And now after b6, the opening of the... Okay, d4 is just too tempting with the open diagonal as well.
d4 is screaming here. I think even e5 is probably playable as well, but d4, I mean, how are you not playing a move like that? He played it last time, and I thought it was a little bit worse. So the idea is definitely something that he is aware of.
But maybe because he had such a bad position the last time around, he doesn't do d4 this time. But d4, I think it's still an opportunity. You just want to get your knight to d5, and Levy says, get out of here.
Ooh, I thought maybe pawn to e5 there, threatening queen g4. Would have been an interesting intermezzo, but all of a sudden g5 and things are exploding on the king side.
Well, actually, e5 is still a move, and e5 probably was a move even with the rook hanging on f6. So that was a good spot by you. e5 still going to be possible. Probably next. It's going to happen next.
Yeah, and next turn, no matter what.
Look at the clock. Levy down under now 16 seconds, counting down. He is 17 with the 1 second increment, but I like black's chances, and I like the position objectively.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Is he going to keep pushing the pawns forward? Remember, obviously, you can't push d4. Your knight is going to be hanging on c4, and the king on g3 covers everything. I love the move knight d6, Robert. That's fantastic.
Knight e4 check. Queen comes to g4 with check. I guess you have to go king h2 after knight
Yep,
to e4. So you do survive for the time being, but queen g4 is still possible. There's no back rank checkmate. After queen g4, queen f7 check, the king
that's
slides to
crazy.
h8, and the knight can block on g8. So that's honestly looking like a big attack for black.
Yeah, queen g4 would be the type of move when you have 8 seconds ticking down that you're like, wait, what? He's getting mated. Wait, no, he's not. Oh my God. And then, the flag comes in. So that would have been a stellar move there. Allowing queen f7 is so tough to do, though.
Agreed. But once you realize it's not a checkmate, then you're much more likely to do it. So queen b8 check is not mate. You have the c8 square under your control, so that's good to keep in mind. But he takes the pawn because of that. Knight c8 now, only move.
Yeah.
And
Queen is necessary, but the knight
queen
on
d6.
h4 also necessary.
Queen d6, trade that off immediately. Oh, no.
Roberto!
Bishop takes f6.
Queen d8.
Oh my gosh.
Oh no, g7, it's over.
He lost.
Yep, GG. That one's done.
I think, honestly, he's falling into this trap of Levy doesn't have that much time. So I'm going to make a couple quick moves. And Levy is so sharp with the tactics that he was able to steal that game when it was going Roberto's way.
Very, very impressive. Once again, Levy with that time ticking down less than 5 seconds. It's like, there's something unlocks in Levy's position, in Levy's brain, that he plays so much better, it feels like. And that's why he's so comfortable getting into this time pressure situation. We criticize it, but at the same time, when he's getting results like that, you can understand why he's feeling okay getting in time pressure.
And Roberto clearly looked at this line, because in the previous game, he went bishop g5, took the knight on f6. Now he put his queen on a4, and he just plays knight d2, opposite colored bishops. Amon, you spoke about this last time around. That bishop will go to g6, and white will push the pawn to f3. Your bishop does not look very good, and white has a dark square bishop to help maintain the coverage of the dark squares that are increasingly vulnerable.
And I'm liking the way this is going for Roberto right now. This looks like a very positional approach. Castling f3. I think that Levy needs to strike very, very quickly with, I don't know if it's something like e5 that needs to happen here. Okay, he plays e5 and immediately just castling. I don't know. This looks good for Roberto, positionally speaking.
It looks fantastic. That bishop on h5 is terrible, and it will never be good. You have to move your knight, play pawn f6, then get your bishop to f7, and it's still not doing anything of note. And okay, if you have to take on d4 like this, now it's an open c file. You have double isolated c pawns. I'll bring a rook to c1. My knight can go to b3. e4 is so well defended. d4 will similarly be defended. I think black is strategically lost already.
Yep, I think this is terrible as an opening for Levy. I don't even think that the engine's reflecting how good it is. Things like knight b3, rook a to e1, getting the pieces over there. It's not even about these pawns. There's so many pawns that are loose in the position. c6, a7. It's not about those things. It's about maintaining the position. Queen c2, knight b3.
How is he? He could have taken the pawn c6 for free, and he played queen c2 because he didn't want to allow any kind of rook b6, rook lift over the king side or something like that. I mean, this is one of those situations where I am going to say that maybe he could have and should have taken the pawn, but I understand why he did this. He's going to play knight b3. He has the queen covering the king side if needed. The rook covers the f3 pawn since the pawn g2 is pinned, and the bishop can come back to c1 over to the king side. Of course, we like white's position, but it's just so funny that he won't take a pawn in c6, and instead we'll just bring the queen back to c2.
And I think we might see something like rook a to e1 and then bishop c1, or bishop c1 first. This bishop's sort of done its job on a3, and unless you're bringing it into c5, I think bishop c1 and rerouting it to e3 or to f4 makes a lot of sense.
And I'm not, I can't speak, but I will not be surprised if white plays g4 himself and says, hey, that bishop wants to go back to g6. Then I go f4, f5, and I can trap your bishop, or just leave it there. Point being, the bishop is not very good. So g4 is tempting to me. g4, bishop c1, all these type of moves. The c6 pawn still hangs if you eventually want to take it.
Yeah, if he ever changes his mind, that's like an open offer. He's been accepted in a university. It's there if he wants it.
And just choose. That's what he has to do. He's up a minute on the clock. He can spend some time here, use it wisely, and then say, maybe I'll play queen c5 because that offers a queen trade.
He has to make a decision, and there he goes. He's got to use that minute to his advantage. One thing about the current position is with opposite bishops on the board, even if everything goes Levy's way, I don't see this game getting ultra tactical. And that's the main way that I could see this position getting out of hand for Roberto.
And he's just going to play queen g3, which hits c7 and threatens bishop g5 at the same time. So he's just really smoothly playing this game. No risk whatsoever. h6 stops the bishop g5 ideas, and king h2. I wasn't even looking at moving my king. He does it. Is he going to play g4 now? Is that why he moved his king over there?
It looks like queen g3 and bishop f4. I'm feeling a connection between Roberto and myself here, Robert. I'm really understanding these moves. King h2, queen g3, just everything under control. This is getting clinical after bishop f4 here.
Well, bishop f4 comes with tempo, wins the c7 pawn. He has to play that, but why was king h2 necessary, I guess?
Yeah, it's just one of those Karpov moves. Is it going to be bishop c7 here? You have to include that one first. Rook f2. Just sit back and admire.
I do admire it because I'm just, please take the darn pawns. And he's like, no, you can't make me. And he's holding steady. He can play rook c1, rook c2, go after the c6 pawn, and now he takes on c7. So he just decided to do it second, and knight d5. Nice tactical shot by Levy.
Well, you see, you're messing with him. You're telling him to take a pawn. He finally takes one, and there's a tactical shot already, knight d5. I mean, poor guy. Let him play his positional chess.
Well, speaking of poor guy, that bishop on g6 is just a sad, sad piece. And Levy goes knight f6 to try to go knight h5, and he goes bishop c1, making sure that his bishop will not be under any attack. And knight c5 is a fork. And after queen takes d4, there's bishop e3, defending everything.
The only thing that saves him, I think, is like, I was going to say queen a5, but there's bishop d2 there. So, nope, nothing saving that rook. It looks like knight c5, but the calm rook f to e2.
Here I like it. He is well ahead. He also is up 45 seconds. Levy's down a pawn and just not really many good-looking moves at this point. So he can play in this manner, and it's fine. It just feels like he does it too regularly.
Yeah, and there's a reason why I brought up that f3 pawn structure against the bishop on h5 in this opening. He's managed to get it. So what great work, I have to say, that I think that he did over the break, because whatever he did, this is a fantastic position, and Levy simply cannot repeat this. There's no way that he can ever play a position like this again.
No, he's going to have to change his opening for sure. Knight h5, hoping for some tactics. If you move your queen, the knight comes to g3, and he goes g4, kicks it out. The downside of that move is there could be a sacrifice on e4. Now the king is a little open, but with rooks on the e-file, that's not happening.
Yep. So it's been a very controlled game so far. 4 seconds. We're going to see probably h4, h5. Yeah.
And at least the knight's an e6 for Levy. That hits the d4. Now knight g5. Could be a sacrifice on f3 e4. Now knight g5 for sure.
Knight g5 for sure. Threatening e4. a5 I do like, though. a5, a4 loosens up the d4 square. So again, we see Levy starting to come to life here with time ticking down.
Okay, d takes c6 should be good. He does it. And queen c, of course, queen c5, right? Of course. But do you see the eval bar drops? Queen c5 was a bad move for some reason.
Yeah. No, I think e4, by the way, e4 will be sacrificed on as soon as he gets a move.
Okay, well, the knight's coming to f5 probably. So no, of course, no sacrifice for you.
Yep, queen trade. Hey, don't forget about those.
True, and he's up 2 pawns, but Levy still has 3 seconds left. So I like the way Levy's holding on. Now the f4 square, be careful about that. Yes,
Levy's doing a great job here. The a pawn is just an easy target, and most importantly, the knight on e6 can't be touched. So it's found a great square where it can stay forever.
Okay, watch out for queen f1 check. So you have to move your rook to d1, but then you hang a2. So he brings rook to f2 to defend. Queen b8, queen b8. Okay, of course he's going to play that move because he trades the queens off, and now he's winning.
That's a tactic. Finding a queen trade that quickly, that's just beautiful stuff. He hangs the rook.
Yep, the rook is hanging, and Roberto gets it. Levy laughs. Oh my gosh.
Well, he's laughing, Robert, because that was like the most in the game that he was the entire game. And then he hangs the rook. It's like, oh man, I don't even get to play.
And you give your opponent some false confidence. Maybe that's what Roberto was really doing. He knew that he had that game. He was just trying to make Levy feel good about the position, only to deflate him at the end. But on a serious note, I think he is just in his own head, Roberto. He's just trying to make trades. And then he went for h4, h5 and all that stuff. And it could have backfired. We saw the eval bar shake at some point saying black has a tactic here. It was overlooked. And now we go back to the Caro-Kann. If I'm Roberto's coach, if I'm his friend, and I have his number. I text him during the break saying, maybe you got to go to something else. It has not been working. And now white has space on the queen side first and will still get the space on the king side next. I do not like the look of this.
Well, b4 c3, I've seen some of these variations before. It's going to be a quick knight d2 to b3, and what this should indicate to Roberto is that he needs to play bishop c8. No, Roberto, that's not what I was going to say. It's not supposed to indicate you're putting all your pieces back on their starting squares. No, I mean, he's doing it to play knight d7, but how can you play with this little space?
I'm telling you, he needs a whole different opening, because they say all pawns, no hope. I see just no hope.
Just no hope.
It's all pawns for white, and b6. Okay, that's a necessary move, but after a takes b6, you can't take with the a pawn, which is necessary if you want to play c5, and c5 is not happening anytime soon. Well, now with rook b8, you're much more likely to see it happen, but still, it just feels like white is well ahead.
It almost needs to happen. I mean, I'm no expert on this stuff, but you know, a New York man such as yourself, you're used to, you know, living in these tight apartments, you know, not a lot of space. I mean, Roberto, I don't know if he's so used to that. He really needs to find places for all his pieces here, because look at that bishop on f8. You need to play knight c6. You got to get bishop e7. You got to get castle. But as soon as you castle, what's waiting for you? Oh, kingside pawn storm.
Yeah, it's not going to be fun either way. So he plays c5 just to try to get some activity. Now, I'd probably take on d4 or b4, whichever. You're going to take back with the pawn, I think, in either direction. And at least you have a target. Now you can play a move like pawn takes a5, knight c6, go after some of the squares on the queen side. There is hope at long last.
Yeah, that knight maybe getting into b4 is going to threaten knight to c2. So that's already something. If you play a6, I think knight b4, that knight on d7 can also go to b6 after you push the pawn. Queen c1 played by Levy, because he doesn't want to move that a pawn at all and allow the moves that I just mentioned.
I'm playing bishop b4, and I am developing. I'm attacking a5 again. I'm pinning your knight. I'm also trying to castle and play f6. That's the theme of this match so far, is, you know, this kind of position. Let me play f6, but Roberto plays bishop. He wants to trade queens.
He wants to play, well, he wants to play knight b4. Let's be clear, hitting that bishop, and the bishop on d8 covers the queen. Again, just it's almost a tactic at this point.
Oh, speaking of tactics, no, it doesn't work. No, I was thinking knight takes e5. Like,
yeah, and just take with the queen.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that looks pretty exciting. This also looks good though.
Yeah, no, I like knight b4, but yeah, it's some sort of sack on e5 and just take it back was possible. But hey, knight b4, queen trade, and you know, not even gonna rag on Roberto for this one. Looks like a great move as well.
This looks great. It's true, because after queen c7, knight takes d3 with check. Throw in the intermezzo, then recapture the queen. Then your bishop comes to a6. Oh my gosh. Queen b1. There has to be like 5
queen
different
c1?
ways.
It's not too special, but it's just a move. It's nothing crazy.
What do you mean it's just a move? That's like the opposite of that's not a move by Canty. That's a move. Say it loud, say it proud.
Doesn't win anything, but you get some nice style points from the judges.
Yes, I would definitely be giving you a 10, even if it doesn't deserve it. So what actually does work?
Bishop a6.
Yeah, bishop a6. Yeah. That way, if the bishop takes, knight c2 check. You don't just recapture. You throw in that check, you win the queen, and that spells trouble for Levy here.
Yep, this is a deadly move. Roberto, we know he's a solid player, but we always mention when it comes to the tactics, he can hang. It's just he doesn't prefer those positions. But hey, this position required tactics to go forward. Knight c2. Levy knows that he's losing his queen here, but he sort of didn't have an option. Bishop a6 so strong, it was going to win something.
Right. So rook takes b1. He'll take back with a rook. I'd probably take on e3. Yep. For Roberto, maybe there's knight takes e5 coming next, or bishop g5 check. All of that looks pretty good. So unfortunately for Levy, this is really out of hand. And after how many moves was it? 10 moves. I thought white was just cruising. Yep. And then that's the downside of having your king in the center, and the pawn breaks happen, and your king's caught in the fire here, and black's king's in the center too, but it just one material.
Bishop g5.
Black. Yeah, bishop g5
Bishop
wins.
g5 is the end of the game. I'm not sure if he notices the move because he's not playing it. Wow, totally missed it.
Too solid. Bishop b6 closes the b file, and I guess bishop takes d4 check is a good move too, right?
Well, if you're playing bishop b6, I feel like you're not looking at bishop d4 check, but you're right. Yeah, that move looks great as well. He might be just go king d8. I feel like that's the most Roberto move.
Yes, king d8 is probably what's going to be played here. And you just get out of the pin, you're up material, so it should still be good. And 6 seconds for Levy. I didn't even see that.
Yeah, he's consistently in these situations. F6 played. He's trying to drum up something.
And Roberto thinking, which means he might even play f takes e5 and keep taking pawns.
Yeah, I think that's strong.
Nothing wrong with king takes d7, though.
Nope. No, he's spoiled for choice right now. Can't complain. Knight b3, looking for knight b5, but queen a3 is going to make sure that knight stays pinned. And hey, another trade. I'm up a lot of material, is what Roberto is saying right now.
Yeah, e5, taking advantage of the pins everywhere. Looks pretty good. Just watch out for g5. If white can play g5 and spring free that pass pawn, that's the only counterplay, but not when the queen's coming into g3, scooping up g4, scooping up h5. Too much stuff. Watch out for the knight fork on e5. That would be tragic.
That would be one way to go out. F6 pawn can be taken. Knight c5. He's getting in there with some tricky knights, but I mean every pawn in the position can be taken right now.
And rook g1 played, takes on c5, and what, e5 now? Just try to dislodge that knight from c5. I guess he accomplished it with the check. And how many extra pawns does black have?
Well, after you take on h5, that's a clean 4.
Gotcha. And this should be easy, but watch out for knight forks. They're always tricky in
and e5 rook d7, by the way. That's closing in on checkmate.
Oh, how do you wait?
Oh, he's lucky he has queen e1. There's no other way to stop it.
Yeah, you have to play queen e1. Just give a bunch of checks, and you need to take the d4 pawn. So I think if you queen e3 check,
queen e3, yeah. He needed queen. Okay, wait a minute. Now the king just shuffles. Yeah, you got to go back like queen c8.
Wait a second. Queen e4. Queen e4. You take a d4 check.
He's missing it. He's totally missing the plot here.
Yeah, you queen f2.
You can't go to f3. This is a huge choke.
Okay,
it's gonna be a 3-time or something.
He has it now. He has queen e4 check and king d3. So queen e3 check, and he's gonna take on d4. Wow, that was close. Levy putting up stubborn defense.
Wow, it's not even over, of course, but out of the woods. I went to queen c5. Oh,
no, he just wants to push that pawn, I guess. And now he's gonna take. What a game! Yeah,
I mean, Roberto is making himself work overtime at his own company. That's the way it feels right now, Robert.
Yes, and the game was just ended there because we're going to go to a break. But Aman, what a game that was, where Roberto had the upper hand from the opening. He had a winning advantage. And what do you make of the changes that happened after the first segment? Now that we see them playing slightly different variations in their openings, who needs to change now?
Well, I think that those Caracons, they seem to somehow work out for Roberto, so he's going to keep going for them. But if you're Levy, I wouldn't shy away from them. Almost every single position has been good, minimum playable, some of them just totally winning. So do not shy away from those if you're Levy. However, I think on the flip side, Levy seriously needs to look at the game that we saw where the pawn got to f3, and it was just a positional masterpiece, if I'm quite honest, by Roberto. So if I'm Levy, I'm taking a look at that opening. I believe it was the Queen's Gambit accepted, and I'm making sure that position never happens again.
Yeah, with few exceptions, it feels like the player with the opening advantage is the player that loses the game. And that last one, clearly an example of that, where Levy had the perfect position out of the opening, all the space, control, and then Roberto was able to break through. So we're going to take a break. When we return, we'll continue this 3+1 segment of this I'm Not a GM Speeches Championship match brought to you by Chess.com. We see the players getting mentally set for their next series of games. Levy, he's back there. He's out in the distance trying to gather himself. Roberto, I don't even know what he's doing, but he's feeling himself quite literally. Aman, what to make of this, man?
Dude, every time I see Roberto's camera, he stresses me out. It just looks like he's stressed for no reason, and it shows in his gameplay that when the time's ticking down, he's missing a few key tactics. Now, in the last game, it didn't actually cost him the game, or maybe a half point, but that is the type of stress and the nerves that he needs to keep in check going forward, because You cannot be missing such important tactics to close out games, especially when the other end of the board, you got Levy Rozman, who is finding them when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I hope during the break, for his sake, he ate a protein bar and did some puzzle rush because the tactics have been in Levy's favor. He's been super sharp in those critical moments. And we do see another Queen's Gambit accepted, but instead of these Bishop B5 lines pinning the knight on C6, Levy plays A6, and it's Roberto to think. So good adjustment by Levy during that break. And now for Roberto, you cannot spend half a minute. You need to just go. And he finally does castle.
Yep, and we have seen similar line before, but Roberto shying away from E4. It looks like E4 early on was one of the reasons that we saw that Bishop B4 pin, and he's actually totally changed the line before Levy could change it himself. So, interesting strategy. Maybe he's thinking, okay, going into the break, Levy's going to take a look at that line because I had a crushing game last time. So I'm going to take a look at a different line so I stay ahead of him and I'm always prepared.
And I can't tell who is bluffing whom because Levy playing very quickly and then puts Queen E8, which you don't play unless you prepared it because Queen E7 looked so much more natural. I guess the point is if D5 instead of D takes E5, the knight would have the E7 square to jump around to. So Levy well prepared here. Roberto not afraid. And look at this diagonal. King H8, play that move. Fill the diagonal.
we need to see this for the ultimate Scrabble word, basically. Queen takes E2, and interesting position. Knight D4 rather kept the pieces on the board. Rook E1, Rook D1. The next couple moves probably won't surprise you. I like Roberto's position, especially when I see Knight F5 lingering, taking on D6, and that bishop on B2 is going to be a monster.
It really is. Although Black doesn't have any true weaknesses in the position. There are some tactical opportunities for Roberto. The bishop on B2 is very strong. I just don't know where to apply pressure on. You get the knight to F5, the bishop comes to E5, for example, and says, now what? And that's the hard thing to figure out for both sides, honestly, because Levy sees the knight F5 coming. Does he preempt it with bishop E5? He chooses that move. And he goes knight F3 to kick the bishop out. So it's hard to figure out all the moves at this point.
Yeah, and bishop's just going to go back. Now, we could see this knight move, but careful, knight A4 can actually just be taken with the queen. Sometimes just easy to forget when a piece is just sitting for many, many moves on a square that is actually really unnatural, not where it usually is. You start to get lulled in this false sense of security, like, oh yeah, it's just queen on D8, just like usual, but no, not the case at all.
And Levy trades off the knights. The bishop on B2 is thrilled to see that knight get out the way. And the G7 pawn, that's what you would like to team up on. You just can't get there so quickly. Rook D4 comes to mind. And then what? I still am not sure how White's advantage goes from aesthetic to actually something concrete.
100%. The knight on G6, probably not the most well-placed piece. Knight E5, timely knight E5 would be good for Levy to get in the position. I can definitely see if we just go, and knight F4, going tactical here. I'm not sure if this is actually good or not. If queen F1, though, we see his idea. He wants knight takes H3 and queen takes on F3.
But I see the eval bar going sky high, and queen C4 is the response. And after knight takes H3 check, he'll go king F1. Just slide the king over, say, yep, I'm safe over here. And I guess there are ideas with rook G4 for white. There are ideas, it must be rook D5 could be considered.
Yeah, rook D. Well, basically, if you can chase the queen away from this knight, then you win on the spot. So rook D5 looks winning for that reason alone. That there's no queen H5, there's no queen G4, and queen E4, you just trade the queens and then go there. Rook H4 played instead. I think rook D5 was the one, but rook H4 leaves options for Levy all of a sudden. Maybe knight G5?
I guess knight G5 he'll take in his rook G4 at the end. At least that's his intention. But maybe Black doesn't have to take back on G5. There could be some tactics with the rook on D1 not being defended. And I see the eval bar is in Black's favor. So there's clearly something here, even if it's not immediately obvious.
Imagine knight G5, knight takes G5, bishop G3, right?
Oh my gosh, that's it.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, that's it.
Hitting the rook, threatening mate, and rook takes D8 back because you're hitting the rook on D1 and the rook comes and gets involved down there. That is a shot.
And if you go rook D5 for white, there's knight takes F3 probably because knight D2 check would be a fork at the end.
takes, and I think you just go bishop to g3 here. I'm trying to see if there's another way to do the same tactic, but yeah, other than queen takes g5, which queen takes g5 doesn't lose on the spot, but certainly not the move you're supposed to play.
No, your bishop g3 move is played. Levy finds it, and Roberto didn't even see it. Look at his face. Did you see that? He lurched backwards. Like, whoa, where did that come from? I am not seeing the tactics today.
No, it's the Levy Rozman tactics show for sure. He is spotting everything, but most importantly, he might miss a tactic or two in this match, but I feel like when he's needed to see a tactic, he's found it.
He certainly has, and for Roberto here, he just can't believe it. He's like, how could I miss that? I'm such a strong player. And he's not saying in a bragging way, just in his head, like, what's wrong with me today? I'm not seeing anything. And for Levy, it's like, all right, I got this. I may be down 1 point, but I'm about to get that point back. And even though I'm lower on the clock, that's more than enough time to win this one.
Bishop takes f2 is available if needed.
And so what's the material count? It's it's checkmate. Who cares what the material?
Who cares what the material is? That is mate, and that's going to be game over. Levy evens the match again. I mean, we have not seen. Have we even seen a 2-game lead? Because we certainly haven't seen more than that. I feel like as soon as one of these guys wins, it's immediately you thrown back in the other guy's court.
We have not seen a 2-game lead. This has been level the whole way through. One player leads, the next player evens it up, and here you see Queen A4 on move 2, and what a strange opening we have already. The knight on d4 feels safe for the time being, and it kind of is a Sicilian allopin with colors reversed.
Exactly, and Queen A5 for black is kind of a tricky sideline against the allopin when white plays c3. So basically Levy is saying, hey, I'll do the exact same thing, but I got an extra move here. I'm playing with the white pieces. So makes sense. And actually, it's going to end up looking like a c4, e5 opening, a pretty standard English position we might get. Maybe something like just g3, bishop g2, and castle for white here.
And we see the start of that, g3, bishop g2 next, as you point out. And for black, you can play knight d7, knight c5 to kick the queen and protect e4. But as is typical, when you push your pawn that far in the opening, it could be overextended and e4 could fall.
Yeah, 100%. This pawn needs to be supported by d5. You guys might all be wondering, what's the point of queen a4? Like, why do we even put that there? Well, it's so that after something like bishop g2, d5 couldn't be played with the queen on a4 before knight d7 because of a pin. So the queen a4, even though it was played on move 2, it was already thinking ahead to this type of position where d5 is harder to play to support that extended pawn in the middle.
And after queen e7, I'm already looking at queen c2 to attack that pawn another time. He plays d3, which is a pawn sacrifice, right? E takes d3, you can't take back. He'll probably just castle and say, let's open this center up with your king on e8.
100%. Knight c5 played, and I think you just go back to d1 here and then castle again after pawn takes pawn.
Right, definitely don't go back to c2. That would have been a big blow.
Yeah, queen c2, you could just take with the knight on d3, actually. We see castle. It's going to be knight captures on e2, followed by, you're going to see rook e1 very, very quickly, and it's going to be all about the compensation here for Levy Rozman. Which knight would you take with? I would have said take with the other knight to maintain knight f5 tricks, but hard to say for sure.
And there was also knight takes c6 tricks as well, so I did not like this knight capturing. I also don't like the response bishop e6 because I would play knight d4 right back, hitting your bishop and hitting the c6 pawn, but b4 it is, and that looks like a good move as well.
Yeah, because b5, b5 is fantastic. Look how strong that bishop is. Do we care that black is up a pawn here? No, he can't even develop the bishop. The interesting thing about b5 is it immediately clarifies that there's no chance for black to castle queenside. That might be something you consider with your bishop on f8, unable to play kingside castle, but isn't Roberto just completely toast here?
Yes, he's in huge trouble. This is a tactical nightmare for Roberto. And Levy, with the smart opening choice, getting Roberto uncomfortable. And look at the position here. Down a pawn is Levy, but up 3 moves of development, castle, rook coming to e1, and bishop on f8 can't get out. Knight e5 is a good choice, all things considered. But I think f4 just kicks that knight out of the center. Rook can come to e1. The c6 pawn is hanging. White can play f4 to f5.
This is trouble. Good. Yeah, f4 is a strong move next. I mean, you could consider knight takes e6, but I think he's just, okay, he goes knight takes e6, yeah. Followed by f4. Knight takes c4, queen a4 check, and it's funny, the queen returns to that move number 2, queen a4 check, and this time it would win a piece and win the game.
And here, I think bishop h3 looks really strong, just putting pressure on the e6 pawn. How could you complain about queen to a4? But now black has knight d4, which is very important. It defends e6 and offers a queen trade. White does not want to trade queens here. So maybe queen a4 was a slight inaccuracy.
I think so. I think so. I think in the previous position, knight d5 looked completely crushing, utilizing the pin. Even here, I'm thinking of knight d5, but knight to d4 is a way to meet that, which is kind of annoying. So knight d4, as you mentioned, this is a big resource for Roberto, and it might keep him. I don't think it's going to give him a better position or anything crazy like that. Levy is still in control, but it continues the game, Robert.
Well, in control by the evaluation, but by the player's feelings, maybe not, because, well, he takes on c6. That's actually probably still a good move, but I feel like Roberto has to be happier about the situation than Levy, who was like, I'm about to go crush you and checkmate you, and now it's like, oh, wait, I got to figure out tactically, am I even still better here?
Right, and I'm actually surprised Roberto didn't play queen takes c6, and then rook takes e6, king f7. Hey, doesn't that guarantee a queen trade?
Yes, and, well, queen e6, rook, queen c6 check, king f7. Your king is safe. The bishop comes to e7. c4 is hanging. Queen e1 check is a threat. Black is the one with the safer king.
Yeah, how did that happen? This is a big throw from what was a great opening position. Bishop d2 looks like the move to play, but hey, c4 is hanging, and we've been talking about how this position is turning around. This is not good for Levy.
And that king on f7 is extremely safe. There's like one check available to white, and as soon as you play queen check, I go bishop e7, you help me develop, thank you very much. And queen e1, queen takes c4. After queen c4, there's queen d4 check, so bishop d2, not even that appealing. If the bishop moves elsewhere, queen e3 check looks scary. So I think queen takes c4 right now.
Need to play that move. If you're a little slow with bishop e7, I think there's other moves like knight d5 and rook e1 to contend with. I'm not a fan of. So take that pawn while you can. This is an important moment. You're threatening queen d4, winning a piece.
And he plays bishop e7. Like, this is a Roberto thing. He moves the safe choice.
Too solid.
Yeah, too solid there. He can take on c4 now, and he probably has to. But I think that he should have taken first.
Yeah, I think white should have maybe played knight d5 instead of rook e1, because 6 seconds left. He has to have a tactic here. Otherwise, Roberto is going to play rook e8 as he does, defend, and I think he's okay now.
Right, his king goes to f8. He's safe. f5, just trying to hope for some bishop f4 or something to attack with. But with the queen on d3, hitting f5, hitting d2, and now even d5 for black, d4 to follow. It's looking too good.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say there might have been some ideas with rook f2 there, some sort of knight d5, but bishop f4, trying to get something going with rook takes e7, and a queen trade proposed that just cannot be accepted by Levy.
And here come the pawns: d4, queen d5. Okay. Yep. I was gonna say queen f3, but there's a rook in the way. So
yeah,
unfortunately,
it's just not gonna work.
No.
Yeah. Queen h1 or queen f3. H1 gets a queen trade, so obviously h1.
Yes.
There we go.
Resignation. So that is a huge disappointment for Levy, because he was playing such a good game out of the opening, and yet Roberto, he hung in there and was able to not just survive but win.
And this is why I think this might be an important turning point. Not only is the 3+1 portion getting closer to being over, but I feel like the players have been trading win for win, win for win. And with the white pieces in this opening, we've often seen Roberto get the win. So it's almost like in tennis. I feel like maybe he's broken serve. And if he wins another game now, that 2-game lead is going to be harder to come back from. And it'll be the first time that we've had it in this match.
That's right. You do not want to face a 2-game deficit. Neither player does. And I've seen people saying, and it's true, that Levy has shown some real might in the previous matches in the bullet portion. But unfortunately for Levy, he's facing probably the best other bullet player in the whole competition in Roberto Molina, who's 2,800 plus in that time control. So there's going to be no advantage in that segment, which means that you need to go into it without a deficit. You want to win this game, obviously, and there are only 6.5 minutes remaining. This could potentially be our final game, or very likely we'll have one more after this.
Right. And the other problem is that if you're Roberto, you got to focus up in this game. The last time we saw an opening like this near the end of the segment, it was actually a very convincing crush by Levy with the black pieces, if we remember. So G4, and what about these dark squares here? I'm concerned after knight G6 for Roberto's position.
If he were another player, I would say he's going to play H4, sacrifice that castle queen side, and just open up the position. But he's not. He's himself. He's going to play the more solid approach. Unfortunately for him, Levy's castled, Levy's striking, and it looks really nice for Levy at this point.
Yeah, I think he missed a pawn though. Queen takes G5 instead of rook E8 looked pretty game over. I know you don't like to take pawns in front of your king, but I don't see any way that that gets exploited here by white.
Although this still looks very promising for Levy. That knight trying to come into B3.
Mm-hmm.
Now E takes F4.
Can probably throw in knight B3 there as a consideration, but I think this is solid and good, and no need to go for anything unnecessarily complicated.
The only hope that I would say white has is if that knight could just move like a bishop for 1 second and go to D4, then you'd be like, okay, the knight's getting to C6. I have some counterplay here, but the E4 pawn is weak. The dark square is under black's control. The king, obviously safer for black. Maybe some kind of F6 move in the near future. I really like Levy's position.
I have to ask, like, what's rook A to C8? I really don't get that move. Not sure if he wants to play C6 or C5. I feel like those moves are not really necessary, but yeah, okay, he just plays rook C8 D8. I wonder if it was honestly a mouse slip.
I think it was just a mistake. I think he wanted to push his C pawn, and he then realized, well, the bishop on G4 can't do that. And Roberto got a trade that he really wanted to have, because now that knight isn't going to harass white's position. And even though I still like black's position, I think that white has good chances with the light square control. I'm looking at that C6 square. I'm looking at a queen C6 in the future because I know how much Roberto wants to trade queens. And then I look at the king side and say, how do you go checkmate white? Because you do want to go for the attack. Knight, look at this move, knight A2. He's going knight B4 and probably knight C6 immediately.
And I was going to say, very surprised by that move. Not only is there bishop D4, which he potentially overlooked, but even just taking that pawn and taking back, I'm not, once again, not convinced by the two rooks over here. I think he should just take it on G5.
And he brings his rook back to D1 with tempo against the bishop. Knight B4, a very serious threat. Okay, we had this position, right?
Yeah.
And he went rook G1 last time. Now he takes on H6.
Exactly.
But it's time for the rook lift. Rook D6. Oh, I didn't like that capture. I think the rook lift immediately was the way to go. Who cares about the number of pawns there? Just go for the king.
Yeah, or you could even be as crazy as to consider something like A5. That hardly makes sense, but it would have stopped knight B4. I think knight B4 is super, super strong. However, it might cause Levy to lift the rook. Like, if he wasn't thinking of it before, he might be like, oh, knight there, I got to do something about this fork. Wow, wait a minute, rook D6 looks decent.
And he brings the queen in, which isn't the piece you want to see there. And now I'm thinking, hey, can I just move my rook back to G1, my king out the way, and use the attack and the open lines for my pieces rather than being attacked? And he plays rook D2, the ultra solid, and I think smart in this instance, move by Roberto, protecting B2. And now his king ducks out the way. He has G2 covered, G1 covered. The only place for black is rook G8, rook G3. But at some point, Roberto can take on E5, the C7 pawn's under attack. There's some problems for Levy to figure out.
Yeah, I'm still thinking that rook G8 makes some sense. Knight takes E5, queen C7. No, queen C3. Sorry, I overlooked that queen trade option.
Of course we did. Queen C3, I mean, honestly, a good move, but it was not expected at this point in time. And, well, is he just going to run his king over? King E1, king D1, keep going?
I was thinking rook F2, king E2.
Oh, that's probably better.
Just to cover F3, and then he'll consider queen takes C7 again.
And Levy's sitting and thinking, he actually might have to move C6 here, and he plays it because rook D1 check is deadly. If you take on C6, your rook on H1 can't be defended. So this was an oversight by Roberto, being too solid again, offering a queen trade, then bringing his rook to the defense, not seeing some of Levy's counter chances.
There was E5 check there, but then the rook would slide over to G6, which is why that wasn't a missed tactic or anything like that. King H8, yeah, he's going to check again on C3, and what he wants is not what Levy's going to give him. He probably wanted that perpetual check.
Oh, he would have loved that. And F6 is a double-edged move. On one hand, you stop the checks, your rook can come into G3 and things of that nature. But look at black's king, pretty exposed. The rook on D6 needs to stay put. The F6 pawn is hanging. The rook on G8 probably needs to stay put because there was queen C8. But now after queen F5, of course, queen D3 was played.
And I love queen f5. Covering c8, also sneaky, threatening queen to b1, which was winning the game. So queen f5, super resourceful by Levy. We see queen e5 here. How about another queen trade? Rook e8, he's going to get it.
There's no choice. You can trade queens, but after queen e5, rook e5, down goes the d5 pawn, and black will be up one with those double f pawns for black. Not sure it's enough to claim it. Oh, that's a great move. Throwing rook g6 in or rook g4. Well done by both players in this game.
Yeah, and I think might just see rook b2 or something like that. Rook f5. Wow.
Oh, rook h6. The rook's trapped if you take.
Wow. What an idea.
That was fantastic by Levy.
Yeah.
And Roberto's holding his head. He's not comfortable being down a pawn here because he could just be lost.
Yep. I think there's a good chance that Levy wins this game. We see the low time, but I have to say in a rook end game is the best chance for Levy. The best position you'd want to be down on time in.
And Roberto allowed Levy to play h5. I think Roberto should have done that himself, but he's just trying to hold steady here. So you can't go after my pawns. And if you do, my rook gets to attack the pawns you're neglecting. And here comes the rook to c1. Levy 2 seconds, now 3. Rook c6, rook a6, rook b6. Just bring your rook behind black's pawns. That's the way to go.
So Levy still has great chances to win here, but I think he made a blunder earlier. He had the rook on c2. He could have taken on b2, and white would take on f4. Didn't go for that, and I think he's completely messed it up.
I hate to be this guy, but this is a position where black can lose because now white has the clear pass pawn and black has 3 seconds left.
Yep.
And here
king e4, you can try. There's rook c4, but
okay, so rook b8, push the b pawn. It's b5.
Yeah, b5 might just win.
King c4. Here. Yeah, look at this. The rook can get to b3, and that's important because rook g8 check b7.
Yep, b7 and rook g8 rather is going to be game over. You can't get the rook behind the pawn and put your king there, so he's going to try to queen his pawn, but to no avail.
And this is a big turning point in the match because Levy, had he converted this, he would be even heading into bullet, and it's still not over. Roberto has to finish this off, but I think he's capable of doing so, although he went back to where he came from. That's not the best way to convert this. And rook g5, what?
I think he wants queen f8 to take the pawn.
And I guess you couldn't take on h4 there, but there's some chances to hold this for Levy, for sure.
I think queen d4 looks really strong.
Okay, so the king's just going all over the place. And king e6. No, if the king's up there, then...
Yeah, this is done.
And g6.
G6 is a good way to do it. Not trade, but lose material there. And once again, Roberto doesn't get the conversion in the cleanest way possible, but you know what? At the end of the day, he did get the conversion, and we talked about how we could see another game, but that game was so long, Robert. It took so much time that was actually the final game in the portion. So you know what? Say that it was bad conversion, but maybe that's just big brain. He just wasted all the clock time remaining in the 3-minute portion, and he's taking the match's first 2-game lead into the break.
It must be heartbreaking for Levy at this point. He still has plenty of opportunity. There's 25 minutes of bullet chess ahead, but he was on the verge of evening this match back up. And now you look at the scoreboard, you're down 2. You see Roberto's bullet rating. That doesn't feel too good. But if anybody can make a comeback in bullet, it is Levy Rozman. He still has a chance. And so I think we should take this break because when we return, we'll get into that final time segment and all the action remains ahead. You will not want to miss it. Stay tuned. And this bullet portion is for all the marbles and that trophy that you see on screen. This is the final. I don't think they're getting a physical trophy, so maybe they'll have to get an NFT of that thing there. But Aman, it is the grand final here. We have Roberto Molina. We have Levy Rozman. These two are duking it out, and all that remains is some bullet chess. Roberto up 2 points. Can Levy get this done?
Well, first of all, the match so far has been highly entertaining and also very, very close. I don't think we've really had a closer match between two heavyweights in this tournament. However, we saw the first sort of serve break, as I indicated, 2-point lead for Roberto. This match was pretty much destined to go into the bullet, tied up. But once again, Levy's being put in that situation that he often finds himself in, where he has to make a comeback in the bullet. Now, you might be saying, well, Levy's done that almost every single match in the tournament thus far. I'm with you. I agree. However, he hasn't played anyone as high-rated or as dangerous in bullet as Roberto Molina. Say what you want about his chess, solid style, but in bullet chess, sometimes that solid, quick chess style is very, very effective.
And here we go. We have that English, which is like a reverse Sicilian Alpin. And Roberto puts the bishop on c5 this time, going right after the knight. So he clearly looked at something and figured out this is a better way to go. Look at that queen a4, Amon. That's pretty awkward.
Yeah, it can't really get back into the position. It's kind of, you play queen a4. Well, now you're stranded out there. And will we see like g3? And no, I was wondering if we would see a pawn sacrifice. He plays a little bit more normally, captures back, and it might get castled on the queen side.
Yeah, he does castle queen side, but Black is ready to attack. D5 says, let's open that side of the board up. A6, B5 comes to mind. Knight B to D7 and just bringing that knight out to C5 or something like that. I feel like White down 20 seconds in this position. I don't know. I'm not really feeling it.
Yep, I agree with you. G3 is looking to maybe get that bishop to G2. Knight G4, pressuring that bishop on E3 is not so comfortable. Instead, Levy's saying, hey, take that. I want your D pawn.
And that d pawn on the direct 3 times. Bishop e6 would be the way to defend, but then the knight comes into d4 to attack it. So he takes on c4. The queen is back in the game at long last. And now there's an e3 weakness, but 2 pawns in the center for White. So a central control, potential problems with the pawns, though.
Yeah, and 2 bishops as well for Roberto, which is why I think the engine is comfortable with Black's position. But opposite side castling. This is going to be a tactical game no matter what.
And Roberto up 15 seconds right now. Pawn to a4. You could think about pawn a3, but then White pushes the pawn to b3 to keep that queen side closed. So I think both sides are doing a very good job. And look at Levy go. Time to break open the position. Bishop on e4, queen h5 next. There could be an attack on the h7 pawn.
Yeah, and remember, Roberto is not developed yet. That bishop isn't out. The f8 rook doesn't have the support of its counterpart on a8 to just swing over. He needs to catch up in development here. Levy is sticking it to the king before Black is fully mobilized.
And Levy was ready. He played h4 instantly. He said, let's go. Let's play h5 soon. He takes on f8 to distract the queen from the e7 square. Now plays h5 and g5. This is so risky for Black.
Yeah, and immediately h6. Now, if that pawn is taken, there's rook h1. I'm surprised we're not seeing bishop f5 from Roberto.
He takes g3. He takes the other pawn, and then bishop can go to f4 or to h4 to block the rook, and he goes to f4 here. And now the bishop can go to h3 with tempo. Bishop f5, your idea is still a possibility. And this could be a problem for White because those pawns might drop.
And I like the move bishop h3. Just tickling the rook, causing it to move off the f-file. I think Roberto has played a fantastic game. He now has 6 seconds. We finally get to see Roberto and his bullet skills with low time on the clock.
And he wants to play a3 to soften the c3 square, but he plays rook e8 first. The knight is pinned and attacked twice. This is wild. 4 seconds. You got to move. I don't even know what the move should be, but he takes an e5 and just keeps taking.
Queen h2. Tricky move. Queen e7 guarding it. The knight moves. So you can take on c2. And there's also rook e1, a huge move coming up next.
I think you can just... Oh, there's king g8, but now knight f6. Knight f6 check.
He missed knight f6. Oh, and now it's just a piece. You can take and go. Wait, he's still moving the king.
Oh my gosh, he's running with the king. And takes an h7. Queen 7 check. Queen 7 check. Whew! He made it with 1.6 seconds left. He barely got that move off.
He needs to move.
And he loses on time.
Oh, he loses on time.
Whoa! And just when he went ahead material, he loses on the clock, and Levy is right back in this. It is 1 point separating these two players, and what a match it's been, what a match it will remain. And there could be tie breaks. We're looking at a situation this close. We could end up in the tie break scenario.
Yeah, we'll discuss that when it becomes more of a possibility and when the time in the 1+1 section gets lower and lower. But for now, the Levy fans can at least tell themselves, look, we are still in this. That was an insane win, and he needed that, Robert, to have a chance in this match. That would have been 3 games ahead for Roberto.
He did need that. He was able to win it, and now is a position that's closed in the center. This pawn e4, we've talked about in previous games where that pawn e4 could be overextended into weakness. Roberto maneuvers knight from f3 to d2 to c4, and bishop back to f1. Make sure there's no sacrifice in the h3 square. I like Roberto's position here. It's just not so easy, to break through, and he plays f4.
Yeah, kind of understandable. F4, you just don't like those positions where the pawn on e4 has so much space that Black gets a free hand to attack.
Caught me off guard, though. I have to be honest there. And he plays b5, trying to open the queen side, while Levy's aiming at the king side. So playing on opposite flanks. Interesting scenario right now.
Bishop e4. Normally, you see a bishop for a knight trade. 2 bishops, you take that. But he's saying, look, I can take that bishop anytime. It's not going anywhere. It can't move anywhere. So now I might take when the knight can't capture back, for example.
I might take and because knight b1. He wants to say bishop a3, and bishop a3 it is. After f5, walks right into it. I actually don't think this is that bad for Levy. Yes, he's losing material, but he's gaining an attack.
Yeah, I agree. Knight b1 is such a telegraphed move. Levy almost didn't expect it to be so obvious. Queen g5, you mentioned that attack coming in. Is it going to be f4? I feel like we have to do something here.
I would be looking right for f4 because knight h4 first. Don't touch that g-pawn. Then the f3 square is black for the taking. And look at the clock, by the way. Roberto, 45 seconds. How is he moving so quickly?
This is like, we've always talked about how good Levy is in time scrambles, but it feels like Levy's really good in those time scrambles in blitz. But now that it's bullet, watch out for Roberto.
And watch out for the back rank because rook takes f4 is met by rook c8 check, and your king is in trouble. And here, rook takes e4 should be good enough. The bishop... Whoa.
Queen trade.
Queen trade and take on e2. Thank you very much. And then knight f5 check. What was that?
That was just a lack of confidence because bishop c4, rook takes e4 and bishop c4 in the previous position was all he needed. Instead, he's now got this position, which should be a draw, but I mean, yeah, they are going to draw it, it looks like.
But another example of Roberto playing too solidly when he could have played for more. He was up material and he just trades queens off, and he has plenty of time. He has 39 seconds when they agreed on a draw there, which means that he could have spent 20 seconds in that moment trying to find a better move.
Yep, that's a good point. And the reason that these guys are agreeing to a draw is because they're both such strong players, and neither one of them feels like they have a big advantage in this format. It's just evenly matched here. So no one wants to waste time because you know what, Robert? They might need it later.
They really might. You don't know who's going to be ahead when there's one game remaining. So they're both players looking for their chances here. And look at this. G4, rook G1. Speaking of telegraphed ideas, going for the king side here. But Roberto says, so what? You can't attack me with a lone rook.
Yeah, what about taking on f5 followed by knight d4? So that bishop sort of has to choose this diagonal. Bishop to g6, there's knight d6.
And he plays d3, which he's played pretty much every game in this line. I don't really like it with the king sitting on e1 and no ability to castle. So I think Roberto has a big advantage, and he's looked nervous, but right now he's stressing to impress, and I think this is a good opportunity for him.
This could be a crush for Roberto. Knight takes f2 prevents castling, and bishop h4 is the other dangerous move that's about to arrive in the position. This looks awful.
It looks really, really bad. Knight takes f2. Bishop h6 could be a potential idea. Probably doesn't work out. Bishop h4 first, hitting f2 with a third piece. And that's the hammer because the f2 is captured with check once the bishop lands there. Now, this is no good for Levy, and he's down 25 seconds.
And this is where the queen on a4 is like, what? Like, look at that thing. How are you going to play h3, g4 and attack the king when your queen is on a4 and can't join the attack for like 4 or 5 moves?
And Roberto...
Rook takes g4?
Yeah, he reacted like he made a mistake, so he didn't like what he did, but I like what he's doing. The queen's on... Oh, I was going to say, isn't that a free piece? The queen on a4 is making itself useful by defending the bishop. And it's important to note the bishop on f2 needs to stay put to defend the queen. Otherwise, bishop e6 check would pick up the queen instead of just trade it.
Maybe knight takes c5 then for that exact reason. Just tempt him into that. I think there might be a queen h1 move to reckon with, but that's what I would be thinking of as a cheapo.
I like the idea. And he plays knight a6, protecting the c5 pawn. And after queen c4, king h8. Okay,
knight b4. Knight b4.
Oh, that's so problematic because your king is forced back to the first rank. And here comes another piece for black into the attack.
Oh, no.
Queen trapped?
And this c5 pawn is covered. Yeah, it's trapped.
Oh, gosh. Now the bishop hangs on g4. I've resigned. If I'm Levy, I'm resigning. Resigning immediately.
Next game. Look at this. We've never seen anyone do this to Levy. Like, 30 seconds he's up. Queen d7. That's a free queen.
He did. He shook his head. So I think he did that on purpose just to hope for some kind of mistake and hang in the queen. But that was a situation where Roberto rolled him over. That cannot be repeated.
No, I mean, but we're seeing even in the games where Levy does win, like the time from Roberto. I mean, people are just only starting to tune in. This is what 2800 can do in bullet. He is so quick, and even though it might not reflect his tactical ability in the slower time controls. And I say slower in the Speed Chess Championship, talking about 5-minute chess. But what we're seeing in bullet here is a different beast. Roberto is sharp right now.
He is, and there's still over 15 minutes remaining. So even if a 3-game lead or it's cut to 1 here, both sides will have chances remaining. I like Levy's position here. He is going for the queen side. The king side, where there's an open G file, is being ignored. And at some point, I was about to say the H2 pawn can be captured. He does it right away.
Yeah, it's funny that H2 pawn, poor guy, just getting sniped from c7, you might think, oh, it's opening up lines to attack. But look at all the pieces. They're all on the other side of the board. There's no attack happening.
No, there certainly is not. And rook c8 played, and we see a trade of rooks.
Knight b5.
Uh-oh. So distracting the rook, then the bishop on c5 is under attack. And what I'm looking at for Levy is, can I just play h5, h4, h3 and try to queen?
I think that's the plan, because even if it doesn't work, it is scary enough that, I mean, you in bullet chess, that's exactly what you do, Robert. A nice, easy plan that you can nearly pre-move.
And queen g1 is a big threat right now. That bishop on e1 doesn't have a defender. So I think you just take on c4. You probably have to, and then play h5 to make sure.
Should go queen g1 first. Yeah,
whoa.
He's thinking of a queen g1 first. I don't know if it's right. There might be some fancy move, like I'm almost looking at queen d3, that type of move, but bishop's hanging with checks. So he goes queen before, guards it. However, what to do here?
I think h5, just push that pawn. You can't go rook h4 because rook d1 check brings the rook here. Now you can can't push h4 because the queen's there. It's a little annoying.
And it's still covering it. However, watch out for a4. This is literally going to be a race between the h and the a pawn.
And the queen goes to f1, so you can go to d3 with check. And a4 would be too risky, so queen d3 check. Now the f3 pawn is vulnerable, and a queen trade offered. It's the typical Roberto move. Yeah.
This is smart. That's a really good move. The bishop from e1, if you take that queen, covers h4, bishop c3. We're just going to see a3, nice and solid. And I think this position is great for Roberto.
Although, be careful, because those light squares over there on the queen side, knight c5, knight b3 check, just keep a lookout for that. And he plays king to b1, getting off the a file, where any sacrifice would have landed with the check. So queen d3, that's really good. That queen.
That's a strong move. And you know what? Queen d5 is going to be played. Look at the time once again. He constantly has 30 seconds against 5. He's such a fast player.
Although, look at that h pawn. g5, h4, knight e6. I would be really careful if I'm Roberto. I want to push b4, b5, a4, a5, get my queenside pawns going. That feels slower.
Well, you talked about b4. There it is. Knight goes to e6, as you mentioned. g5, h4, all those moves coming in. Black's position is shaping up here.
Yeah, knight takes f3 and then push the h pawn. Oh, you got to move. He does move. h4, keep pushing him. h3.
That'd be rook d1. h3, h2. Go all the way. It's going to be 2 pawns on the queen side against the rook.
The g pawn doesn't help. g5 was probably too slow, because now b6, a5, a6, you get all those pawns going. And it's crazy how one tempo in chess can completely change the evaluation.
b6, b7. I think rook c1 is also something to look out for, and that trade is not going to help as the h pawn falls now, and just rook h6. And that's game over after e5.
Yeah, d3. Hope for rook takes f6. No, he brings king back.
Smart guy. Rook d6 if he wants. Yep.
And then a7, and then you can't take on e5. Okay, so play e6, but now the rook's got to go. So he has a chance to hold this game.
It's almost
a7.
Worse. Oh, wait a minute. What? Okay, everyone's missing something here.
Yeah, the bar was going boop, boop, boop.
Yeah. Rook e8, though. Rook e8.
Oh, good call.
Easy to lose this in bullet. Great move, rook b3. He's trying to cut the king off.
Wait, he didn't trade rooks. He could have traded rooks.
That doesn't make any sense. He's going to lose this game now.
Because the king is cut off.
He could have traded rooks. That's a huge throw. The king is cut off, and this is going to be the standard Lucena position with tons of time to execute it. That's a throw.
And it's what you were saying, that the actual ability to play on is bad for Levy because it wastes time. And wow, that's a big moment. And the pawn pushes, the king comes up. I would just resign.
Man, this is just terrible to play on, because you know it's losing, and you also know the other guy knows how to convert it. Even rook a5 doesn't even threaten mate here.
Right, the rook on d2 covers the d8 square. So we see resignation is a 3-point lead for Roberto now, and that's big. That's huge. Still almost 11 minutes, plenty of time, but Levy needs to win, and needs to win now.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. He has to win now. He's going with the London system in a must-win game. Is it going to be knight bd2? Yes, it is. And what does Roberto have against this opening is my question. It's going to be e6, ultra solid, bishop d6, queen b6 to follow.
Of course, I'm laughing because if anyone's going to trade queens, it is Roberto. But this can be annoying. This b6 pawn, it's stuck there, it's doubled, and bishop back to g3. So it's not like white has any huge advantage right now. It's about the long-term potential.
Well, I mean, we're playing a London system, so you're definitely right that white doesn't have any huge advantage. That's pretty much in the rule book when you play the opening to start off. Bishop c7, going for trades. He doesn't need to do anything special here. I think white, comfortable position, but nothing crazy just yet.
Well, e4 was a big mistake. You can't afford to have your center collapse in this manner.
Yep.
And I think it's because of the match score. Like Levy just played e4 to break things open. I need to win the game. If
Hmm.
he had been even on the scoreboard, he probably would have taken a little more care.
Full pawn down. There's going to be knight d4 to follow. The knight can just reach f6. I think he's going to go knight a4. Yeah, even though there's knight d5 here, followed by knight c to e7. Ultra solid, ultra
Whoa.
strong.
He gives up the b6 pawn. That cannot be good because white has this outside pass pawn now.
There's hopes here for Levy Rozman. However, those knights still look dangerous to me. But look at the game by Levy here. He's got chances.
And bishop comes to e4, covering the c2 square, hitting the knight in the center. That knight on a4, though, that's the problem of mine. If you play b4, rook a8 happens, and the a3 pawn falls next. So you need to get that knight back, and it's just a struggle to do so.
Yeah, maybe g3 to take the f4 square. But hang on, rook c4 attacks 2 pieces. What about that knight on a4? Can we just attack it with rook a8? Where does it go?
Well, now it's going to b6, and that bishop on e4 is thrilled to be there because the b7 pawn's in trouble. If knight c6, b4, b5, or b4, a4, a5, things like that, the knight is not that stable on c6, and it goes to d5. I would be tempted to capture it and then go after the d pawn. This endgame is much better for white.
It is, but I kind of like the decision to just go for that rook endgame because the bishop on e4 was looking really, really strong. Instead, he's bringing the king in. I don't like b4 at all. All of a sudden, the a pawn is an easy target, but if that pawn gets to a5, that's a different story.
And that d pawn is well defended. Now the b7 pawn overprotected, so the rook on c7 can release into the position with rook c3 or rook c2 or rook c4 even. So I think that this was a good decision by Roberto. He's using his clock wisely, and Levy, he needs to get this game. I'm looking at the clock, 8 minutes. He doesn't have to. He can win the next 2 and have enough time for one more, but he certainly can't afford to lose this.
It looks like it's going to be a long game. I mean, if a6 happens, the only person that has chances here seems to be Roberto. But do you think, Robert, that he is going to take a quick draw here, or he's going to play it out for what could be like up to a minute, 2 minutes?
I'm playing this out. I'm just shuffling my rook back and forth. I have 20 seconds. I can waste match clock and get this down to 7 minutes, maybe 6.5.
Easily. I think much more than that. I think that you can play about, 40, 50 moves here, and that's 40, 50 seconds a piece. I think you can take 2-3 seconds off the clock, or sorry, 2-3 minutes off the clock easily.
Well, we see the checks, and then now Roberto thinking, do I want to keep giving checks? No, because rook to d1. And if I'm Levy, I probably would just keep trying to like king g5, king f4, and back and forth. But it's not easy to accomplish all these things, and you just lost a rook endgame. So you need to be careful that you don't make any kind of silly blunders.
Agreed.
And the king's up on g5, f6 check. King has to go to h5, only move, but then you give a rook b7 check at the end of the line, so that would not be advisable.
Right. And here, I think you could play f6 check if you wanted to.
I think Roberto is just avoiding any sort of danger. It might not be that dangerous, but hey, he went for it.
There we go. Now something like rook c5 is going to hit that pawn, and this is not what Levy wants. Rook g1, cut that king off, and this is very, very frustrating. You could even just lose this on the board or something with rook g5 and bring the king in.
Oh my gosh, like king e7. Rook e4 check. Rook e4 check was...
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
I think you have to lose this pawn now. This is as bad as it could be for Levy. He's not even playing king e5. He's going the slow way.
No, and this pawn's going down, and it should still be a hold, but it's very difficult with no time.
Look, he's not taking it. That's exactly... He's wasting more time.
He's just going king d2. It's smart. Smart match
super
play.
Smart.
Oh no, king f3. Rook h tries mate.
Uh-oh.
Okay, rook h4 saves the day for now, but rook takes f5. I would take the pawn now.
The king is in a mating net, and now rook g5, f5, f4, and we can see him lose by this. Okay, he allowed the king to get through, and Roberto knows he just messed that up.
Yep.
However, it's not all about that. It's not all about the result, Robert. It's about taking match. But look, he did take about 2 to 3 minutes off the clock, and he can still go for another minute.
Just wait until he pushes f5. This is move 91. We're getting to 150 moves.
Easily. I think this should go even more than that.
Are we about to break some SEC record for longest game played?
I hope so. Technically, that pawn on f5 should stay there for 49 moves, right? If we're maximizing as black, obviously it's bullet. Nothing's going to be perfect. But I'm just saying that's the idea.
Although the issue here is rook g8 check is coming and the king to f4, so you might not have too much of a choice.
You're still playing this, though. Rook f1, you're bringing the king down to h7.
You go rook g4 check. I knew he was going to do that because now he can't lose and he can't blunder a rook and he can just play this out for a while.
Yep. This is at least another 20 seconds.
This went from 7.5 minutes to under 5.
Yep, there's g3, and he's going to repeat all those again, and then he can let his 15 seconds run out as well.
This is unbelievable.
That might be 3. Okay, it is 3.
So
he probably shouldn't have played that move, but let's just talk about the job he did there. He just took so much time off the clock. It was like 3 or 4 minutes.
You were correct once again, partner. And Roberto, he's inching closer and closer to the title because there are 4 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. Levy needs to win all the remaining games. So he needs to be able to win 2 games with 2 seconds remaining on the match clock to start that final game. And right now with the white pieces, I have to say I prefer Roberto's position.
I'm taking on b8, by the way, if I'm Roberto. Just simple chess. Trade bishop for knight. Don't even worry about the position. He's just doubling rooks. I mean, I don't even see how Levy really wins this position either. That's the tough part.
Well, he put his pawn at b4, which is a good plan for black. If you take, bishop takes, the rook on e1 would have been lost. He's opening up the queen side, and that's a bit scary for white with his pawn on a2. And okay, well, he's doing this, which might be a good move, honestly. Just kind of out of desperation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Knight d6 to d5.
Okay.
Bishop d2.
But rook b8. Yeah, you can release the e8 rook. The knight protects the bishop there.
Understandable. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense.
This is kind of cool. I really like the whoa. Exchange sack by Roberto saying you're not getting that b4 pawn. I have a bishop and 2 pawns for your rook. And I
really like that.
Yeah, I'm not even sure black is better. And the very least, it's going to take a lot of time to win a position like this, if you can.
That's the issue that I see is that let's say Levy wins this game. There's I think the match is over because it's currently a 3-game lead. I think Roberto's play in the last game, the game prior, just won him the match.
And I might go as far back and maybe be as bold to say that the final 3-minute game won Roberto the match because that was one where Levy had it in the bag, it seemed. Roberto somehow survived that scary opening, and then Levy couldn't handle it and lost. And so Roberto took a 2-game lead instead of it being an even match heading into the bullet.
And this, by the way, is like Roberto's better. Yes. So this is not even like, he's going to lose this game, lose the next game, and just win the match. No, he's actually doing better in this game. He's got 3 pawns for that exchange. I mean, this completely winning. It's a great game by Roberto, honestly, that exchange stack. But on top of that, I mean, just the clock is running down. The match clock is running down way too much.
And look at how compact his position is. The knight, the rook, the bishop, those pawns on the center and on the queen side, all defended very nicely. So this is just vintage Roberto, and he's winning this game. That pawn is very far advanced and just 2 precise moves, and the game concludes.
Exactly.
Rook
King
takes d5.
You can just probably queen the pawn. Yeah, take on d5. Some combo there.
Okay, so the knight moved away.
I think rook c7, rook c6 is possible there.
Dang, knight on a8. Nobody likes knights in the corner like that.
Oh, I don't like this move though. b5 needs to be played by white. There we go.
And then king c4, bishop b4 as well, or just b6, b7. That looks straightforward enough.
Yeah.
He took on f6. Probably not needed, but still good.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He's I mean, the problem is black doesn't have any pawns. Like, he's got an h pawn. Like, you can't win without any pawns. Finally, he's going to start pushing it, but I think just b6.
There it goes. And rook b1 check does not win the b6 pawn because white can play bishop b2, blocking off that rook. And rook b7. Should be a checkmate somewhere.
Yeah, you get that feeling. I think knight d7, knight b6.
Well, knight d7, king d5, knight b6, king c6. Be careful.
That's funny. That's funny. And he saw it, but that was a really good trick by Levy there.
Oh, not rook takes a7 because there's bishop a3 to block the rook off.
That's been the saving grace in many of these positions, and you can just knight f6 and take that game. So even if you look at the match clock, by the way, 25 seconds, there was going to be no chance of a comeback, even if he loses that game. But Roberto now, I mean, he still looks like this is a tied match and we're going into Armageddon. Dude, you just won. I mean, you're up 4 games.
Do you think he knows that the match clock's about to expire? Because it seems like he doesn't.
Yeah, it seems like he doesn't, but even if he doesn't, what he should know is that he's definitely won this match, because whether he knows that it's like expired now officially and the match is over, he definitely looks like this is match point. Everything's on the line, tense position, 3 seconds left.
And his chair is shaking. Like there is something going on. He is shaking. You could see it vibrating here. But Roberto, I mean, all the emotions will probably be let loose when the match officially concludes. But he has been so strong throughout this entire event. From the very first match against Alessia, yes, it was an odds match, but he showed his might there. Then he beat Lawrence Trent, and that was a real battle. Lawrence gave him all he could handle. Then he beats Lars Oscar Haug by sweeping the bullet. And finally, in this last match against Levy Rozman, there were wins traded off in the early going. Then at the end of the 3-minute portion, he gets a 2-game lead. And in the bullet, he proved why he's a 2,800 plus bullet player. And for Levy, it's been a great event as well. But Roberto, at this stage, you can't say that he's not. He certainly is a deserving champion.
Yeah, and he's even going to finish off with a win here. You often see the last game, be a loss because they're already so focused on the match being over. But the thing is, he doesn't know the match is over. So he's full focus mode, and he's completely winning this game.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's paying attention to nothing besides the moves, the board. He's up a rook and a bishop, and there's a resignation, and that's it. Let's see. Does Roberto finally breathe? He does. Oh man! I mean,
oh my goodness! I feel like it's the first time that he's taken a breath the entire match.
And I think he's just fallen asleep because he's out of breath. He's exhausted. The wind is gone. And okay, for both players, it's been an epic tournament. For Levy, of course, this final didn't go his way, but he was worthy of being in the finale here. And of course, credit to Roberto Molina, proving the Brazilian international master, who also is a streamer. He is trying to become a grandmaster, very powerful player. So, Man, any final thoughts before we go to break and welcome the players for an interview?
Well, I'll save my final thoughts for a conversation with them, because I'm sure that both of these guys have a lot to say after what was an insanely epic match, down to the wire. Robert, the games were very tactical. Roberto was out of his element, and he was able to keep up with Levy in every time control and even demonstrate why he was actually the one to be feared in the bullet portion. And congrats to him, of course.
Absolutely. Everybody, you will not want to miss this post-match interview with the champion and the runner-up. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Roberto and Levy.
And Robert and I are still here, but we are joined with both participants of today's epic final matchup in the I Am Not a GM Speed Chess Championship. We have Roberto and Levy both joining us. Roberto, I'm just going to go to you. Obviously, congratulations on the match, but Robert and I were watching that final bullet game. You had already won the match, but you were not even breathing, it looked like. You were locked in, still focused right to the end. What do you have to say about the match overall and your victory today?
Chess is always concentration, and I have some luck to some preparations line put in the games. For example, the Queen's Gambit accept. Just at the Brazilian people send me good energy também. Is very important to play my best.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely did play your best. You performed very well. And I mean, Levy, you had a great event and you were right in the thick of this match. Was it that final 3-minute game after that when you had a great position and then it slipped away? Did you just feel like it was going to be Roberto's match from there?
Yeah. So that second to last blitz game where I had the English the first time I played this Queen A4 and I had just a great position and totally messed it up. I mean, Roberto defended like extremely well. I felt like that was the biggest difference in the match. Every time I felt good, he would just take my dreams away from me. And then of course, once I lost the next game, I'm sitting there like, I gotta win. And then I lose and I'm down 2. And I'm like, all right, I still have a chance, but it's not the same because he's also very good at bullet. I won that first game and I was hyped. And then, yeah, he took my soul after that. And then to add on to the stress, we just got a massive delivery and our landlords are like ringing on our doorbell incessantly and banging on the door, and I'm just sitting here like, I'm giving this interview. That's extra stress. But yeah, GG's, man. You defended really well. I feel like both of us played so nervous, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it was
Sure. Of course.
Yeah, we agree with that assessment. I was actually going to ask you, Roberto, what you felt in terms of the nerves in this match, because it seemed like there were a lot of tactics that you were missing in favor of more solid and defensive moves. Now, do you think that's just more part of your style, or were you feeling that in the finals you were a little bit nervous coming into this?
In the beginning of the match, I was totally nervous. For example, in the first and the second game, the first game I lost, and the second game the correct result is Levy's wins, but my pawns going. I don't know how they are advanced, but after this nervous start, I begin focus more and try to see the best defense, some tactics. But I think I dropped some pieces. This is normal in blitz. Some good positions I stake. That's okay.
Right. No, of course it's normal. And Levy, speaking of openings and on your end of things, your white piece against the Caro-Kann looks stellar. Every time you gained a ton of space and it looked very good for you. Is it weird for you to play against your pet opening, or do you just sort of say, hey, it's another opening, I got to do what I got to do?
No, actually the opposite. I love to play against Caro-Kann. I was very much looking forward to it. But I don't know. They're like, I know the positions are good and it's like a consistent, like small advantage, but no, I mean, Roberto made it very difficult. Like even the positions where I thought looked good, within a few moves, he's playing fast and like I'm hesitating and all of a sudden I'm down a minute. So he showed his wisdom. He's a few years, my senior. He had that wisdom and like the ability to kind of keep his nerves down. I think better than me, and he just ended up outplaying me. And good position or not, you have to win the whole game. And he was able to go from start to finish much more consistently.
Some compliments to your opponent. Levy, I also wanted to ask you about what I felt was kind of a pivotal moment in the bullet portion, which really sort of sealed the match. I'm referring to the bullet game, which pretty much lasted about 6 minutes, if you remember which one I'm talking about. So just wondering what your thoughts were on that game, because it looked like in terms of the gamesmanship, that was just really smart strategy. He burned a lot of clock there.
Yeah, I was trying to like get aggressive in that game and attack, but it's just such a blur. Like, I played London. I'm like, I'm going to go checkmate his king. And then all of a sudden, like we have no queens on the board. And I'm like, why did I do that?
Game? What's the game?
The game, you had a 3-game lead in the bullet, and I had like 14, maybe like 12 minutes, 11 minutes. And I'm like, okay, if I win now, I have a chance. And then the game lasted like 6 minutes. I was like, okay, yeah. And then I almost lost. So
the rook end game.
Yes. Yeah. No, I would do it too. Don't worry.
I played with the rules, the to gain some time, but I know this isn't the best way to put the match to win, but it's okay. And I think I need to fix this Caro-Kann with h4. A lot of bad positions without the space. I need to study this deeply.
Yeah. And well, Roberto, I have a question for you. I mean, you've won this event. It was very hard fought and a job well done. What's next for you? I know you stream. You talked about how you want to become a grandmaster when more tournaments take place. What's your near future looking like?
I just study chess to improve my knowledge and waiting for the presential tournaments, because in Brazil, the pandemic is really crazy. And I don't know how much time I need to play the next presential tournament. But I will studying, doing my streaming, and learning some chess, probably.
That sounds like a nice way to go. I'll throw the same sort of question to you, Levy. I mean, you mentioned a few different types of stress that you've had during this tournament. You still made it to the finals, had an incredible performance, and you've obviously had lots of fans cheering you on throughout the event. So, any final thoughts here as the event wraps up?
I remember Lawrence Trent beat Danny Wrench and then declared on Twitter he wants to become a grandmaster. It's not as dramatic for me. At the end of the day, it's all, it's online blitz and bullet, but it's fun. I think I've had like my best month of chess in like 5 years, maybe. So, like I hit my blitz peak. I'm very far from that now, but I hit it actually in the second game against Greg. It was 28-30. So I'm just gonna keep doing what I do, and definitely want to wish my opponent best of luck in getting the grandmaster title, because I've had a lot of people tell me he's definitely deserving. So best of luck to you,
Thanks.
Roberto, on that.
To you too. You deserve to.
Wow. Yeah, no, I guess that's the note to end this interview on. We definitely appreciate you both joining us. Congrats again, Roberto, and congrats to you too, Levy. You played marvelously throughout the event, and you were very close to taking this down. So congrats both of you, and thanks so much.
Thanks for the commentary, guys. It's been amazing.
Thanks for the invite to tournament, and it's okay.
Well, thank you both. And there we have it, everybody. You see the trophy, Roberto Molina's name underneath it. He has successfully invaded the cornfield. Ahmad, he has done it. He is the champion of the I'm Not GM Speed Chess Championship. All of his fans have been spamming the emote. They know what's up. We know what's up. And Roberto, at long last, he's breathing, he's smiling, and he can have some relief.
He can. And well deserved. Really impressive tournament, start to finish, from both players, but obviously, a special highlight to the performance of Roberto Molina in the finals here. I feel like, he was the deserving winner today. The chess reflected that. He was tactically sharp in the bullet portion, and he showed, that queen trading solid style. That's enough to win. A defense wins championships, Robert.
And it's kind of funny because when the time was actually less, he started being more tactical rather than less. So something about it was going his way. He found his footing. He was able to win some of those final 3-minute games. And then the bullet, he showed that he is 2,800 plus for a reason. And of course, Levy put up a great fight. If that final 3-minute game had gone his way, maybe this would have been a different match. But I do think that Roberto is the deserving champion of this tournament. And it has been a fun time with you, my partner.
Oh, it certainly has. It's been a tournament that's taken place over months. We actually had a break in the middle of it while the exciting PogChamps event took place. And, people just coming back, remembering this tournament, still supporting it, and always coming in and watching with, huge viewership. So we appreciate the full audience, the full auditorium here, as, we watched some epic blunders, some intense matches, and we even got to see a playoff take place, a tiebreaker in one of the matches. So start to finish, Robert, there's been a lot of clippable highlight moments for me, and it's just been awesome to be in the commentary booth.
Certainly has, and remiss not to thank everybody, including our producers, including everyone behind the scenes making these matches possible. People working on fair play to ensure that the event is held in the highest order. And of course, everyone in chat, the moderators who are doing a great job. Not that they're needed too much because everyone is so great. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, for making this another special edition of the I'm Not GM Speed Chess Championship. And Aman, I can't go out here without thanking you again, because it's been so much more fun commentating alongside you. You made it the best tournament possible. So thank you, my friend.
Let's go. Thank you very much, Robert. I'll hit you right back with some praise. Robert, it's been a pleasure. One of the best duos out there. I'm going to say it while we're still on air. Thanks for watching, guys. And what can we say? Keep up with the chess. There'll be lots more events on Chess.com. But for now, the I Am Not a GM tournament brought to you by Chess.com has come to an end. We're going to be taking off. Take care, guys, and we'll see you next time.